This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
I've missed doing that. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Economy, Culture and Skills Committee meeting. Members of the public may like to follow London Assembly on X using the hashtag Assembly Economy. Please may I remind everyone to switch phones to silent mode and ask members and guests to ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of the microphones, that they get a bit temperamental if that happens. Members and guests are also reminded to position their microphones so that they can be heard clearly. And if you need to move your microphone, please will you do it by holding it that way as opposed to grabbing that, because it will break the microphone. Today, our main item of business is the committee's ongoing investigation into London's nighttime economy. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee officer to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Okay, thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 24th July 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record? Can I ask the committee to note the ongoing actions arising from the previous meeting? We now move to our main item of business, which is a discussion with our invited guests on the committee's investigation into London's nighttime economy. This meeting will be split into two parts, with the first one focusing on recovery from the pandemic and long-term challenges facing the nighttime economy. The second part will be looking at the role of licensing, as well as LGBTQ+ and grassroots music venues. I will now welcome, with great pleasure, our first panel of guests, Dr. Charisse Beaumont, who is the Chief Executive and Co-founder of Black Lives in Music. Welcome. Councillor David Robson, who is the Chair of Licensing and who is the Chair of the Licensing Subcommittee at Lambeth Council. Welcome, David. Steve Garlick, who is the regional organiser of GMB. Welcome, Steve. And Dougal Johnson, who's the policy officer for Equity UK. Welcome, Dougal. So we have a number of questions to ask you, and I will start off. And if I can say to both panel members and to committee members, we've got it's a packed session, so we've got to get through these really quickly. So if you could restrain yourself to just, not to answering quite succinctly, and don't be offended if we say, could we move on, because we've got quite a lot to get through. Panel members, what I'm going to do is start off with a question for all of you, and if I could ask you just for a couple of seconds before you answer the question, just talk a little bit about your experience and the organisation that you represent. So the first question is, forgive me whilst I just sort out my papers. First question, in your opinion, what are the main challenges facing London's nighttime economy at present? So, Cherise, can we start with you? Can you turn your microphone? Sorry, the microphone. Thank you.
Some of the main challenges, I represent an organisation called Black Lives in Music, the name saying what it says on the tin. And we do data and research in the UK music industry in regards to lived experience of being Black, Asian and ethnically diverse in the live music industry. And with it, we published a report in 2021, and some of the verbatim quotes that we got in there were some serious barriers to putting on gigs, putting on events as a Black person, quite a lot of over-policing as promoters, having to change your name to become a white name just so you can get the gig. A lot of promoters out there who have very long-standing, a lot of experience in putting promotions on events for who are megastars now, but at grassroots level, putting on events and having their events getting cancelled or transferred to larger corporations such as Live Nation and the AEGs, just because of the issues with licensing. So we began to see this arise in terms of the Form 696, we'll speak about that later, in stealth. And we worked alongside the Musicians Union to write an open letter to the Mayor Sadiq Khan in regards to the issues of the legacy of Form 696 and how it is stifling growth within the Black and Asian community to actually make a living, which is their human right. And that's been well received, and I guess that is why I'm here today. We've created a steering committee called REML, which is the Race Equality in Music Licensing and Events, chaired by Amy, and we are doing some amazing work. We have amazing members of the board, industry stakeholders such as UK Music, the Live Group, Musicians Unions, as I've already mentioned, as well as the Metropolitan Police, London local authorities, and MOPAC. And so we're looking forward to doing some great work there.
Thank you, Cherise, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about that as we go on. So, in your opinion, what are the main challenges facing London's nighttime economy at present?
Okay, so one of the main challenges is the barriers to be able to actually, for certain communities to be able to actually have the ability to be an entrepreneur. So the nighttime economy is obviously full of the arts, culture, heritage, as well as music, which is part of the arts. However, when you're Black, I think the stat is only 2.8% or 2.8% of Black people actually have an occupation within that sector. That reflected in the nighttime economy. Although we're seeing 500,000 people working within the nighttime economy, I question at what level they're working at. Are they, and there's nothing wrong with this, but are they entry level? Are they security? Are they bouncers on the door? Do they have the opportunity to become entrepreneurs, actually put on events, actually put on programming that is of benefit to the nighttime economy and to those audiences? And I'd have to say no. So that's a major challenge in regards to black and brown communities within the London at the moment.
Thank you. Steve, just a few seconds about you and then an answer to the question, please.
Thanks. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Basically, GMB Union represents workers at all levels of the night economy, just not within central London, but within outer London. And I would speak to the fact that that does include NHS staff, security staff, and others in custodial roles, as well as those who are undertaking the work within the entertainment, arts and other industries as well. Ultimately, there are a high level of issues, certainly multiple issues that have occurred post-pandemic. Some of that relates to travel issues and accessibility. Some of that relates to safety and security, not only for the staff who may be making their way to or from their place of work, but those who are undertaking work in very precarious circumstances, such as food delivery, the Deliveroos and the Uber Eats of this world, and private hire and taxi drivers who are more likely to face either verbal or physical assault than many others. And that curtails into, or dovetails, I should say, into those working within security. We've heard about door staff amongst others. I also have members who work within UCLH, as an example, who are paid just 25 pence an hour extra to work in accident and emergency wearing a stab vest under immense risk and constantly facing disciplinary action for having to take action against those who are prepared to assault emergency service staff. It is a huge concern. We're deeply concerned for our casino members. We have a lot of members working in London's casinos. With the advent of online gaming, that has had an effect as well. And ultimately, from a transport perspective, the cost of getting to and from work has not decreased in an era where we've seen a high cost of living surge in the past few years.
Thank you. So that those are what you would say are what you regard as the main issues facing the...
I think there are more issues. Certainly there's consistent issues over businesses taking on staff in the wrong fashion. We've got a situation with one very well-known company that has taken senior management staff within their own business and removed their normal level of wages and put them down to a lower wage and included them in the staff trunk or tipping culture, so they now get a proportion of the tips that go to the staff who are actually working at the coalface. So management are being paid that. Not only does that actually affect the possibility of them getting financial services for mortgages and like, but it takes money away from those who are really working at the coalface. And from my perspective, it's wholly inappropriate. It's a cost-cutting culture that shouldn't be existing.
Right, thank you. Douglas.
Hi, I'm from Equity. We're a trade union of performers and creative workers. We have almost 50,000 members. About 75% of our members are actors. The remainder are stage managers, drag artists, comedians, designers, directors, cabaret artists, variety performers, a whole range of things across the performing arts. We, unsurprisingly, the largest single group of our members is in London. About 35% of our members are based in London. And we have collective agreements covering the majority of theatre in London. On the West End, subsidising commercial theatre. And about approximately 80% of West End performers at any one point are members. To pick two, I think, key challenges, they would be, firstly, the loss of venues for our members to perform in, and secondly, the immense cost of living pressures. In terms of the first, I don't think the committee needs any reminding on the dire picture of kind of the loss of venues in London over the past 2 decades. The GLA's own figures tell us about I think the figure is about 1 in 6 venues have been lost over the past in the period from 2006 to 2022. This is obviously a massive threat to the ability of our members to do the work that they do. Many of these LGBT venues are crucial spaces for them to develop their craft, to own their performance and develop their career. And they're also a reliable source of regular work for members where, they may be doing much more irregular work in other venues. The pressures there are well known, and I'm sure we'll get into them around kind of the cost of operating for those venues, licensing issues, pressure from property developers, and so on. And there are, of course, some well-known examples. And Equity most recently has been heavily involved in the campaign to save the Bethnal Green Working Men's Club, which is the latest LGBT plus venue to face closure or threatened with closure. The second kind of key issue for our members is obviously the cost of living. The performing arts is an incredibly tough career, characterized by low pay, insecurity, short-term engagements, high barriers to entry. London is increasingly a very inhospitable place for them to build their careers without, immense family support or other sources of support. Rising rents, transport costs, and so on make it, more and more difficult for members to pursue careers, and that's not just in kind of smaller types of venue and less well-paid work, but our members, even who work on the best paid types of work and on the best rates that Equity's negotiated on West End shows, tell us that they struggle with the cost of living and with kind of security of income. So in brief, those are the two main issues.
Thank you very much. David?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for asking me here this afternoon. It's a bit terrifying, if I'm honest, looking at you all from here. Summer's officially over. So my name's David. I'm a councillor from Lambeth, representing Clapham Town. Recently elected as the Chair of Licensing about 4 months ago. But I come to you this afternoon with 2 decades-long experience in the nighttime economy, having been a DJ, probably in many of the venues that you mentioned that have since closed down. I promise I didn't contribute to them closing down. But so I've kind of come at this from someone who's experienced that work and as someone being involved from a Lambeth perspective. Lambeth's quite unique, I think, as a borough, because most boroughs in London have kind of one area, don't they, where there's a thriving nighttime economy. We have 4. When you think we've got Waterloo South Bank, Vauxhall, Brixton, and in my ward of Clapham Town, which I believe outside the West End has the highest influx of people over a weekend. I think up to 30,000 people can pass through a weekend, which has its own challenges, especially around policing and antisocial behaviour, etc. But I just thought that's a unique kind of little fact for you about us in Lambeth. So that's kind of who I am and my position and why I come to this. 2 points. In brief, I suppose I would piggyback on what you said, Dougald, about the cost of living crisis, but I would emphasise that from a business perspective. Drinks are going up. Who can afford to go out anymore to some degree? I mean, I got around in the other week and I was like, well, how much? I might as well, and then that contributes to people's rent, to people's bills. Everything's going up and people are feeling the pinch. And I'm not sure, look, I moved to London 20 years ago this month, actually. Used to be able to go out every night of the week. There was the diversity and variety of London's nightlife is what attracted me here. I'm not sure if we have that anymore, and I think that a huge contribution to that is there's just not as much spare change for people in kind of going out anymore. So, and there's a real risk, I think, for businesses not taking chances and being diverse with their programming. And if businesses aren't being brave and making decisions, then I feel that London might go the way of some other international cities where we just end up being residential. And I know we need homes and stuff, but this kind of segues onto my second point. High streets up and down the country are facing a huge challenge at the moment. I'm thrilled that Clapham is the thriving high street, because when I go back home to the northeast of England and Darlington, and see that it's kind of deserted, what would we rather have? A thriving high street with a heavy nighttime economy, or absolutely invisible? But there is, the challenges that kind of come in that as well is if a venue, sometimes you're not 2 or 3 months away from having to close. And if the venue closes and then the landlord just decides to turn that into flats, and then you get residents that move in, that then start complaining about a nighttime economy that's been there for 30, 40 years, then you've got a clash there as well, haven't you? And I don't know, there's a bit of work to be done, I think, on the balance between residential needs and supporting local business. So that's kind of, so piggybacking on cost of living, but integration, I think, as well, and town planning, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. And David, Councillor Robson, please don't be terrified. We're a lovely, lovely committee and we don't bite. So can I pass over to Assemblymember Polanski,
I'm
please?
not allowed to bite now.
No, you're not.
Joking,
Absolutely not. All biting banned in this
exactly.
committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. David, if I can come to you first, I just want to pick up on something you just said, actually, about making sure that nightlife is for everyone and not just one particular group of people. Now, we've heard from Charisse, and I know the conversation is going to be returned to later by a colleague, around making sure that black artists and performers and creators are supported. On the flip side of that, what are you doing to make sure that the nighttime economy is inclusive for everyone, and particularly black and brown audiences?
From a Lambeth perspective,
Yeah.
And as I say, I can't, I've been in this role now for just about 4 months, and we've just had a mayor election campaign, general election campaign. I can't give you, I'm not going to come to this committee and give you a fake news of this is what I'm doing or what we have been doing. I can't speak to that effect from the previous chair, who would have been more involved in that kind of work, I'm afraid.
That's okay. And do you have any reflections on things that you would like to do, even if they've not been done previously?
I'd like to see, I think there's still a bit of post-COVID work to be done in licensing. And I think we're only just getting back ahead of that. And I'd like to see more engagement work with venues before things get to a hearing or reactionary. I'd like to see a bit more prevention of working between business, local authority and residents, so that it's a bit more engagement work rather than things getting to kind of, final stage or whatever, where a residents complaining about loud music or whatever, so wants the venue gone. I don't know, there's much more to be done, I think, here on the engagement work, I think. And I think Lambeth is, we just published a 24 to 29 plan, which I believe is available via the website. So I would say, for me personally, get more engagement, positive engagement with venues.
Thank you. And Charisse, can I just jump to you on that? So if I'm thinking specifically about audiences, and I know you've largely come here to speak about the creators themselves, but are there things you would like to see local councils do to make sure that the nighttime economy is appealing to more diverse audiences?
Absolutely. I think engagement is a key word. And some of the feedbacks that we've had from our forums on Remmel is the need for engagement with more transparent processes. So, as you said, not starting at the end, actually starting from the beginning, which is more transparent processes and policies put in place in regards to licensing. And then engagement. Some of the issues that we see in regards to the cancellation of events, larger organisations, larger venues don't have that issue because they have relationships with the police, they have relationships with their local councillors. But smaller venues, black promoters, don't have such relationships. Therefore, there is no protection, there is no transparency, there is no way of being able to appeal or rebuttal against certain decisions. So engagement, using your word, engagement is key in regards to seeing through some changes in regards to policy and frameworks that are desperately needed in licensing.
Thank you. It was really nicely articulated. And David, if I can return to you now on licensing. So I just want to ask, what role does licensing play in a local nighttime economy? And what are the key kind of considerations that you make in the committee when making licensing decisions?
So when something comes to committee, it's usually if there's been an objection, or so we kind of are there to be the mediators for the hearing, basically. And I think there can be an issue that comes with that, because you can make an objection from anywhere in the country. You can just be, one of the better words, a NIMBY, but then just making an objection for the sake of it. So it then ends up coming to committee. But when did it need to? And then if something goes through. But I think we've been doing a lot more in Lambeth about trying to make sure that process of mediation is done much earlier. But we've got Does that answer a little bit? Or
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can I come back to you on a point that you just mentioned earlier about diversity, though, as well?
Yes,
I think
please.
Lambeth is, one of the most diverse boroughs in London, and it's certainly what we pride ourselves on. And I think, there's a number of, the different areas that we have. I think there's certainly a lot that appeals to different communities. I suppose I just wanted to bring that to kind of the committee's attention as well.
Makes sense. I've got Stephen, then Charisse.
just on the licensing front, what I think we would also like to see is that when licenses are granted, even for takeaway or food delivery, that there is a safety element for the workers working within those establishments, but also an element that allows access for those who are doing food delivery to be able to access the toilets and the hand wash facilities. Because on a frequent basis, workers who have no access to public facilities are out working multiple hours, long hours, without access, and quite frequently they're turned away at a door from a premises that is making profit from selling product onto consumers without giving any thought to the workers who are actually doing the delivery work.
Thank you, it's really important. If my colleague Caroline Russell was here too, she'd be very keen to talk about public toilets, I imagine. Thank you. Charisse.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to say Lambeth actually have one of the first cultural officers, licensing officers, and it's situated in Lambeth, and it's been very well received. And one of our recommendations is that cultural officers should be a statutory party in the licensing process, you know, acting as a mediator, somebody who's proactive and supportive of black and brown artists and promoters and venue owners. So just to say kudos that there is some work happening in Lambeth.
It's really helpful context. Thank you, David.
Just to jump in as well from your point there. So, I mean, we have faced an ongoing issues with striking a balance in licensing policy with maintaining a 24-hour economy and local community concern. And I think a particular issue has been the managing, as you said, of late-night delivery alcohol and late-night refreshment licenses. And we've adopted standard conditions for premises licenses to give a degree of certainty in this area. But that's certainly something that's been coming up a bit more, even just in my kind of short time in this. I know you'd probably like to hear a little bit more maybe to do with the O2, but as I say, but I wasn't chair at that kind of particular point, so don't feel I can talk to the effect of something to do with that this evening, because especially that will have, just wanted to flag that as well.
Understood. I just have two other quick questions about inclusivity. So one is I've been working with a group of young care experienced young people with a policy forum called Drive Forward. So they've been coming up with their own policies and ideas. And one commitment I've made to them is to bring their voice into City Hall and to bring them up in committees. When I talked to them about nighttime economy, they talked about loneliness. So that's disproportionately felt by care experienced young people. And there is a barrier to engaging in the nighttime economy, mainly what we're just talking about, cost of living, etc. Is there any specific work that Lambeth is looking into where you'd be interested to see them do to make it specifically accessible for care experienced young people?
Well, I mean, as someone who found solace, you know, as a young queer person in nightlife, you know, it was a valuable and really important thing to me, and I think that helped me get to, you know, sitting in front of you today. So if there's anything to do with, you know, how we can be creating pathways to make our, younger people getting involved with nightlife, I can't speak on behalf of the cabinet member responsible for licensing, but I certainly would be interested in hearing more, yes.
Like, I guess a suggestion would be some local authorities give people access to gyms for cheaper, for instance. And I'm just wondering if there could be something like that with music venues or theatre or things that happen in the evenings.
I mean, there could be some that already are doing such things. I mean, I see there's a nod there from Charisse. I don't know if you maybe want to jump in on that, but I'm sure there's probably stuff like that. I'd be surprised if stuff like that already wasn't happening in Lambeth, to be honest.
Sure. And my final question, both of us have known each other for a long time from the LGBT scene. It's not the most accessible in terms of wheelchair access or for disabilities. Is there any work specifically you're doing in Lambeth or know of around London around making sure that the nighttime economy is accessible to disabled people?
I've known some activists that have been on about this for a long time, right. And I don't think things have got any better anytime soon. And I don't know if that's, going back to what you were saying, we're losing our venues as it is. But the new ones that are opening up, are they becoming a bit more accessible? I mean, I'm pleased that, you know, we've got a venue in my ward of Clapham Town, Arch, that I think opened up just after COVID, which is complete disability access, as is the Bridge. So I think people are much more conscious when they're opening a new premises to make it available to all. But again, I can't speak to full effect of what the full Lambeth policy is on disability accessibility within the licensing policies.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Assembly Member Bakari, but I've a little bit of a warning to everybody on members. We are already slightly behind, so if we could sort of, speed up the pace of things. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you. I'm going to dive deeper into the discrimination in licensing. I know that you've already touched on this, Charisse, but it was quite evident that there is a problem, and it was in a committee meeting, House of Commons Digital, Cultural, Media and Sports Committee meeting in 2019, which highlighted events being cancelled if they found out there was a hip-hop or a rap artist playing, and artists were saying that they felt that there was institutionalised racism within the industry, because of the kind of responses they were getting. Your own report said that 74% of black music creators who were surveyed were dissatisfied. Have things got any better since then? That was in 2021, your report.
Yeah, we're about to launch an updated version of that report. Sadly to say, and I think about this all the time as Black Lives in Music, I wonder if we're failing, because it hasn't. But one thing I'm definitely heartened by is committees such as this, where we as black people, black and brown people, have solutions. We live this experience. We see some of the areas where there is discrimination, and we're able to address that. So I want to be able to do that today. To answer your question, it hasn't got better. We are conducting a piece of research alongside the Mayor and the Metropolitan Police in regards to this very issue in licensing. So we do, and it's never been done before, like most things when it comes to research and black and brown people. However, we've got verbatim data, stories for days. A lot of cancellation of events happen under 4 objectives, whether it's preventing crime and disorder, promoting public safety, preventing public nuisance, or protection of children from harm. And we get the cancellation of those events under those 4 objectives. The word safety always comes into effect. Are these events safe to put on? But safety, I would argue, or everyone will argue, is a racist narrative. Our events get cancelled just because they're a Bollywood event, or if it's under, it could be jazz, or it could be drum and bass. It could be any genre that attracts a black and brown audience. And this is the legacy of the racist Form 696, where promoters were made to write the genre and the potential audience that would be coming on top of a form provided by the police. And then there would be no surprise, given the current situation with the police, that these would be rejected. So, and it happens time and time again. And it's happening even today, where venue owners and promoters will have to fill out temporary event notices just so they can put on an event after 9:30. And sometimes the event it might be a jazz event, the jazz ensemble playing at a cultural hub, and they would get rejected. But when you leave that cultural hub and walk down the road, the pub's still open, playing the same music that they wouldn't be allowed to play. This happens week to week. There's cancellations of events happening up and down the country, particularly in London, week to week. And it's not spoken about because there is a culture of silence. There is fear of promoters losing their license or not being able to put on an event again. We have some of the stories we hear, even up to recently, large venues receiving that call from the police saying, please, we think you shouldn't put on this event. We encourage you not to do so. Large organisations. So imagine if you're a smaller promoter and you're getting that call from the police saying, we don't think your event should go ahead. And if it does, we may shut you down. This is what black and brown entrepreneurs, promoters and artists face every single day. And
it's disappointing.
It's very disappointing.
I mean, the fact that the Metropolitan Police did scrap the form 696, that impact hasn't made much of a difference then, despite the fact that they scrapped it.
It happens by stealth. There are other forms to complete, you know. The TENS form, like I said, temporary event notices, you have to complete. Another form that doesn't say 696 on the top. You know, there are other forms to complete. And then, you know, what our research and the data that we're gathering from our research is there are other ways that the police are monitoring. They're monitoring artists on YouTube. They're monitoring artists on Instagram. You know, if an artist, you know, you could be a cello player and you might be related to somebody who is not, you know, might be involved in something bad. You want to go and play at an event, you're related to that person, so you can't play. There's a whole effect that is happening. And all of this is data-led. We've got evidence, and we're just looking to capture it so we can present it here one day with your support, and that we can put some frameworks in place, as I said earlier on, processes in place, where we can see a more transparent, that police won't be making a call where it's all verbal, but instead they will have to, if they want to object, they have to do it in writing. So there's a repeal. We don't get to repeal. So, yeah, unfortunately, to answer your question, the legacy of Form 696 is very much apparent, unfortunately.
Thank you. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. My question is also to Sharice and kind of continues on the same theme. In one of those reports from the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, it was talking about artists getting their events cancelled on the day, as you mentioned. There's one here that we have of an artist being told that the venue just kind of Googled them, searched them up on YouTube, listened to their music and said, "Oh, you play hip-hop?" And she said, "Yes." And they said, "Oh, sorry, we're going to have to cancel your event. We'll lose our licence." How much of a barrier is there still kind of for black, Asian, minority ethnic musicians in wanting to perform live in London?
For creators wanting to perform live, you know, you have to really be, and as we are entrepreneurial, we have to be innovative. So social media is helping. However, you can't really grow an audience. You know what it's like to go to a live event. It's so special. There's nothing like it. Like I always say, it would send a person, an audience member, from indifference to an expert fan instantly on an amazing performance. So it does hinder an artist's career. Therefore, if you're not able to perform in front of an audience, how can your audience grow? On top of that, if you're a manager or a promoter, if your event's getting cancelled 20 minutes before the event, in some cases, you're losing money. And as I said earlier, we as black and brown people have a right to work. This is a human right. We are working. The creative industries is a place of work. Yes, you're using your creativity, but ultimately you can make money. So with these licensing decisions, the question is, how much is it costing the nighttime economy by cancelling these events? And these are the things that we have to look at. In regards to audience, we're talking about the nighttime economy, people who want to go out, people who want to see their favourite rap artist, their favourite singer, folk singer, go and play. I have to say, you know, yes, rap and hip-hop under the guise of safety, but I have to say the evidence that we have is across all genres. We're talking about race here, not genre. Genre is used as an excuse. But on Form 696, it was what type of audience are you expecting? So if we're seeing your black and brown audience, i.e. if you're doing a Bollywood event, and you know, we've got people who've shared with us that they've put on a Bollywood event and had a rogue, I don't think it was rogue, but a rogue licensing officer come in and shut down the event just because they can. And they lost out on months of revenue, and it destroyed their lives. That's one person who did a Bollywood event. And we're talking about Christmas parties. We're talking about various different types of events. Licensing is an issue that we do need to discuss and ensure that it's transparent and fair.
And you mentioned about Lambeth and their cultural officer and that being, a good introduction. Are there any particular examples of good and bad practices in different parts of London?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we have had some people say Islington is a good example of a borough that's doing well. There are no issues there, but every other borough seems to be inconsistent. There's an inconsistency of approach when there are flagships. A lot of these venues, a lot of these promoters are used to be the poster child for that borough. Look, we're so diverse. Look, we're so cultural, and this is what we're doing. But they get their tens rejected. They're not allowed to operate after certain hours, if at all, and that affects the food and beverage aspects post-gigs as well. So we're talking about a whole economic factor in this, where black and brown people are being used as the poster child for London boroughs, but at the same time not being treated as fair as their counterparts, their white counterparts.
Thank you, Sharice. Oh, Steve?
Perhaps a step in the right direction might be a borough inclusivity or venue inclusivity register, where borough commands from police, licensing, and obviously venues are involved. Because if people know where the roadmap is for those venues, then they're more likely to want to be able to go to those venues, and it will also hopefully shame other venues into actually wanting to be part of that register. Or the question is then able to be asked, why are you not part of that inclusivity register?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Garrett.
Thanks. Just listening to all of that makes me think that it might be worth us writing to the police with some of those. Oh, they're not here. It would be, how would I put it diplomatically? I would be interested to hear their response to some pretty strong concerns that have been raised. I think, I don't know whether we could do that as part of our evidence gathering, be to write to the police and say, what is their version of these events? Because I think what's been said shouldn't. I think that we ought to put that challenge to the police. Is what I'm suggesting. Would that be something we could do?
Yes, I think we could, and I think that's a very good idea. Thank you, Assembly Member Garrett.
Thanks. So coming back to licensing, and I suppose the difficulty of getting a license, retaining a license, possibly even expanding a license, in the wild optimistic dreams that we have of our nighttime economy. What we've heard previously is from venues that it's difficult, and not just difficult, but sort of a complicated labyrinth of I did sit down with our head of licensing at one of my local councils and asked them to explain it to me, and at the end of it, I think I knew less than when I started. So I don't know whether either David or others, are there, is there work that happens maybe in Lambeth or that you're aware of elsewhere, just to help venues to navigate, not so much put public opinion to one side from it, but just the actual legal maze itself, to actually get to the application and to get all the bits of paper in the right place?
I mean, I think we've got a strong team of officers that try and always say to anybody who's having an application, we're here to work with you and to help you guide through it. We want to see businesses thriving and being open. But again, just coming into this role fresh, I think one of the roles that I've been trying to understand is this, what's the picture across London, So I've contacted my counterparts up in Camden, Islington and Westminster and said, hey, can we get together for a little bit of a chat, actually, to try and understand if these, because, Joe Public doesn't see going out in London like we see our boroughs, you don't stay in one borough, do you? You kind of go all over. So I think that's important to understand in how we operate and learning and having lessons learned how other local authorities, what they're doing, But I've almost felt like, considering how large a nighttime economy Lambeth has, are our officers do we have a small team? Should we have a much larger team? And I think the answer, I'm still investigating this, but I'm not sure how well resourced local authorities are at the moment to be able to have a more substantial team of officers. But I'd say the ones that we particularly have are very big on the engagement again and making sure that they walk through the process of it in good detail.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point because sometimes when people get very... licensing is one of these areas where it's very technical. The people who really know it inside out forget all of the things that everybody else doesn't know or doesn't even understand remotely. And so sometimes you can assume far more knowledge from people.
Yeah.
I don't know. In terms of the GLA, I don't know if anyone from the GLA has sort of had sort of outreach from them to support either that or, you know, other aspects of...
yeah, there's a whole nighttime enterprise thing happening in Lambeth at the minute as well that I haven't been as much engaged on yet, but I think there's something coming up very shortly. So yeah, I think the GLA has been quite supportive with Cabinet and licensing officers in developing a kind of nighttime plan for Lambeth.
And that would include sort of support for venues to try to navigate the licensing process, you think?
I think, but for me personally, I'd like to see something like a licensing forum that brings together existing venues, police and local authority, that gets everybody sat around the table, maybe meeting quarterly, that has, I was mentioning this to Zach earlier when you were talking about engagement, something that's keeping a conversation going. And maybe it's something like that where these things can kind of come up, you know, working with the bids a bit more closely, you know, and all that kind of, don't necessarily reinvent the wheel, but look at existing resources and make sure we're maximising them to the best of their ability, really.
Yeah, I mean, bids are a good point, actually. Presumably most of these sorts of areas that have a nighttime economy, or town centres and things, are the sorts of places that often have those.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. You just made me think that actually that I don't know what my local bids are doing in this regard. So I might take that away as a bit of homework. In terms of the actual sort of the hearing, if you like. One of the things that I'm often conscious of, it happens in planning as well and in licensing, is there's usually a queue around the block of people objecting. You know, there'll be the local residents and their association. Off the back of that, often the local councillor, whose personal views might not align with that, but anyway, they know which side their bread is buttered, so they turn up at the licensing committee. And then there'll be the police, who usually will have something to say about security, and you know, they very rarely will be encouraging, you know,
I think I'm yet to
wild nights out. Yeah. Well, if you meet some police officers outside of the uniform, sometimes they understand the benefits of the nighttime economy. Yeah. But how often, if ever, is there somebody who comes into either who makes a formal representation on paper or who actually attends the hearing to say, this would be great, this venue is wonderful, they've currently got a licence till 11, I'd love them to have this application to be open till 1?
Oh, you've got me thinking, Mr. Garris. I mean, I went into licensing straight away, and obviously, like I said, become chair in April. And I'm really stretched to think of somebody who has come on to... I mean, we've had written testimonials of support, usually for takeaway services to be open a little bit longer, but nothing in the way of... the objections far more outweigh those than attending support. Yeah. And I think it's tricky for MPs, councillors, assembly members. They usually come along as well to object. I'm yet to hear kind of say, oh, this would be really great for the local economy, the local area, you know, residents can get involved, etc., etc. So, I'd say that they're few and far between those that usually come to us that are in favour.
Yeah, I mean...
but I don't know if that's just the natural British way to complain.
It possibly. I was going to say, as a councillor, I did once attend a planning committee to be really strongly in favour of a thing, and I was conscious that that was apparently not a thing that people do.
Yeah.
So the reason I mention it is because obviously when you sit in one of these hearings, you have, even if, you know, you hear a balance of arguments one way or the other, and you'll always hear a clear argument from the police and from, you know, those various people I've mentioned about why this is a problem. Yeah. And if there's nobody in the room saying, actually, this is a really good thing, you know, I don't know, let's pick a central London place, Soho, let's say. It's a really good thing that London has this vibrant area that people from across the city can go to, and that representation doesn't appear in that hearing.
But, I mean, as chair, and I think we've got a really strong committee. I think when we're having deliberations, we will make the argument for that with ourselves. You know, deliberations can take, you know, hours, so I'd say we do take strongly into consideration what's presented to us, but people are, you know, people do their research before a hearing. We have site visits. People take into account, you know, the area of where it is. So I'd say it's not something that's, oh, all these people have turned up and objected, so we'll just sweep that through. You know, there's a lot of consideration and that's kind of taken into them. And I think, I think I mentioned to it earlier at the start, you know, London was known for our nightlife, weren't we? And if we're developing into this kind of library city, I want for a better phrase, you know, where that kind of culture and nightlife going somewhere else, it's something to keep a lookout for, really, I suppose.
I don't know where they're going. If you find out, let me know.
I don't know. I don't know where they're going. Let's have a group visit. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Therese, I'm coming back to you, Ben. What you've been saying so far has been really interesting and I think very illuminating. And just to reflect on what Neil had said, I've also been in a committee to show my support for it in past. It does happen, but it is these things can be very, very complicated, especially when you have hundreds of emails telling you why things are really bad. But in your opening comments, I was really interested to hear about your work with REML and how that's going. But mostly, you've touched on this before, but the research into the experiences of that REML's carrying out. I'm just wondering if you could tell us sort of a bit more about the methods and what you will eventually do with the research that you conduct across London.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, we're really excited about this piece of work that we've been commissioned to do by the GLA, and we are working, as I said earlier, with a conglomerate, UK Music, Musicians Union, the Live Group, which is the umbrella trade body for the live music industry, to unpick and find out what's happening in regards to licensing of events. We're grateful to be working with the Metropolitan Police, MOPAC and London local authorities. We have been discussing this. This is a project that is already, if I say just over a year old. But we are commissioning our researcher this month and commencing the research this month. I have to take an unbiased view, but I kind of already know what it's going to say, if you would, because of just the research that we do. However, so the outcomes is that we're looking to ensure that REML, that group of stakeholders, is holding MOPAC even to account. So I know MOPAC holds the police to account, but holding MOPAC to account. We're hoping that we're getting some insights from the research that will allow us to create a framework to ensure that processes are correct. And the only way we can do that is through the help of the GLA. So we're really grateful to be here today. We're using, there are some best practices that we've seen around the world, particularly in Wisconsin in the USA, where they faced the same issue. All of the hip hop and black events were being shut down, and they were able to work with the mayor, able to work with the police to ensure that there was transparency and that that community of musicians, creators and entrepreneurs, venue owners and promoters can thrive. We're hoping to emulate the same thing. We have a stakeholder group of experts in research, such as an organisation called Sound Diplomacy, which look at the economics of music all over the world. They're also a part of this, so there will be a financial aspect of it, the loss of what these current licensing issues and what the loss of it is to the economy. And it's going to be a thrilling piece of work if executed well. That's the part. The plan is there. Hopefully it's executed, and then we'll get a report that we hope will, for lack of a better word, actually change the game. We need this to change now. We've been talking about it. We said DCMS meeting 2000, and this is age old for us. Since Windrush, since putting on events, since having our cafes burnt down, and it's the same thing. So we need to see a change.
I very much look forward to seeing that research, and I hope we're able to bring that back to committee and give you an opportunity to explore. And just to say, I've spent lots of time in Wisconsin, including last week, and I've never heard it referred to in this chamber. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And if we could have sight of the report when you release it, that would be wonderful. The next question is Assembly Member Giorgio, you had a quick question to ask, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, simply because it's topical, and Steve and Dougal, it's primarily aimed at you both, given your work with staff. What impact would the government's proposed restrictions on outdoor smoking have on your workers and the sustainability of their jobs if footfall declined? I'm not asking for your view on the health aspects of smoking and whatever, but there is a social impact and an economical one. Just very briefly, your views.
Well, I'll look as an example towards casinos. There was a stage where individuals could smoke in casinos, and there was the question of what damage that would cause. Obviously, that dissipated. On the health side, there was an uptick on the fact that individuals weren't taking in second-hand smoke, and I recognise there is a question around the health aspects of vaping, which will be, sometime down the line to see where we're at on that picture. I think there's no doubt that certainly individuals find themselves generally outdoors where smoking is taking place. So, frankly, I don't know that it's necessarily going to affect venues or restaurants per se, except in those instances where there's outdoor smoking or outdoor beer gardens or pavement seating, as an example, for those working in restaurant or food service in general. Certainly, I think it's too early to say what that looks like. I would imagine this is something that potentially even predates Labour, because it's something that I would imagine the Department of Health would have been looking at in the round, and so it's possibly been coming down the track for a while. We need a bit more time to consider what that could mean. Obviously, anything that can affect jobs is always going to be of concern. We want people to be able to earn. We want London to be successful, and we want, obviously, for businesses to be successful, to pay the workers a fair living for the job they're doing, but we want them to be safe and healthy as well.
Obviously, it's not something that's top of equity's concerns, I would say. When it comes to theatre already, obviously audiences can't smoke in theatres. I suppose where it might be more relevant is when it comes to smaller venues, drag venues, for example. But I think those smaller venues have much larger problems on their plate than the effects of any further restrictions on smoking.
Thank you. Just to say, I'll give one venue as an example, and it is so the Yard in Soho. Nice courtyard out the front. The reason I know is because they do brilliant mojitos in there, or at least the last time I went. And when you go, generally a lot of people smoke outside, smoking, social aspect, and that could be a draw to the bar. That's where I was getting at from an economical perspective. But Steve, on your point, I appreciate it's too early to tell, but thank you for your responses. Thank you.
Thank you, and forgive me, I should have said, for anyone following, that we are now onto the section about nighttime workers, in case anyone's wondered why we've suddenly jumped. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Mainly to Stephen Dougal again. What impact has the pandemic had on people working in the kind of broader nighttime economy in the performing arts and entertainment sector?
For our members working in theatre, obviously the pandemic led to, a total stop of their work. There are a few other industries where work had to completely cease for such a long period as theatres, not to mention, obviously, members who work in nightclubs where they were closed for even longer. That had an enormous impact on the theatre sector and on the performing arts entertainment sector. More widely, and that I think impact is still being felt. There are obviously areas which have recovered much more quickly than others. So in the West End, audience numbers have already more than recovered to their pre-pandemic peak. But in other work, which is the majority of our members' work, in smaller theatres, in drag, cabaret, and so on, obviously the impacts of those are still really deeply felt. In terms of kind of government support, one of Equity's main concerns around that is that a lot of that support our members weren't eligible for. So about 40% of our members were not eligible for the self-employment income support scheme, and so had to turn to other sources of support like benefits, universal credit, where there were all sorts of problems there too. And the Cultural Recovery Fund, which was the government scheme to support venues to keep going after the pandemic, that obviously was of great support to lots of venues. But for the workforce, that didn't necessarily translate into money in their pockets and keeping their livelihoods going. So unsurprisingly, the impact was not equally felt, and the greatest impact fell on those who are most underrepresented in the industry already. It's no surprise that the performing arts is an incredibly difficult area of work to get into, and that the sort of diversity picture on performing arts is quite poor. Some figures that we got into in 2021 showed us that about 44% of black minority ethnic women had left the profession, and we don't expect that they have returned in the same numbers as people with as workers with greater resilience and support might have returned to the industry. So that has obviously been a really serious impact in terms of access to performing arts, which are already a really difficult industry to get into and survive in.
So I think there's been multiple issues on multiple levels. As an example, we deal with issues in relation to food service delivery drivers who bring into, as an example, Pret-a-Manger. We saw a huge amount of Prets close down. Best Foods, who service those sites, obviously saw huge challenges post-pandemic, and it's starting to move back in the right direction for food service in general. And I would also add that food service workers who are actually in food delivery also face a further set of problems, especially in central London environs. If you can imagine taking palletised deliveries into premises and then facing individuals who are prepared to steal and pilfer from those pallets food product and obviously get away literally scot-free after threatening those who are actually making the delivery. They're not going to want to put up a battle over that, but obviously it is a risk to those individuals, and these are individuals who face this on a regular basis. We've seen general concerns over incomes reducing and restaurant closures, as an example. Hospitality has seen a real problem, even with regard to hotel hospitality, where numbers are still slowly returning back to where they need to within London. There's multiple reasons for this, but obviously the cost of raw product and what that means when you're actually putting something onto a menu has increased. Where we were looking, I suppose, pre-pandemic, something like £7 or £8 for maybe a burger meal now, you're looking probably nearer 12 or 14 pounds. That's going to have an effect. The moment you start to look at a higher level menu, that's going to have an effect. Once people start talking about increased service charges that aren't necessarily even meeting the hospitality staff, that will have an effect. The closures have been the biggest issue, because restaurants aren't getting the traction they should, especially on nights of the week that they used to. I worked at night for many, many, many years, and I can speak to the fact that the dimension of central London and even outer London has changed quite considerably. And you look at the take-up of venues, restaurants, hotels, and the footfall is really noticeable when you're out. I think it's a real disappointment. More needs to be done to perhaps say London is open for business, and we need to get that message out to the wider world.
James, I think David wanted to
David,
respond.
yeah.
Did you want to come?
Just very quickly to add to what Steve said, I think in some ways it's almost unhelpful to think about it in terms of recovery from the pandemic, because it sort of suggests that things are sort of there was a disruption, and then we just need to sort of return to where we were. But we obviously know that the pressures on venues and workers are greater than they've ever been, and lots of them are kind of unrelated to the pandemic. So some of the things Steve was talking about in terms of the massive increase in operating costs and cost of living pressures on workers are kind of a huge threat, and in some way connected to the pandemic, but in many ways not. So I think it's important to bear that in mind.
Yeah, and as you say, many venues were closing pre-pandemic anyway.
Exactly.
Restaurants were closing pre-pandemic anyway.
Yeah.
David?
Just to come in from my kind of previous live perspective as someone who was a DJ for many years in a lot of London's LGBT venues, post-COVID, I have to say I found that the offers and the varieties of places to play had shrinked considerably. Venues, promoters, budgets have just completely, whether that's been a brewery or who are struggling, but independent venues as well, really struggling. And I think I made this point at the kind of start. And if you don't have that rich of diversity in your kind of programming, I think we kind of lose out a little. It was almost, you couldn't just be a DJ anymore. Do you do drag as well? Or what else can you do? Can you sweep the floor as you go across the room or whatever? So, you're doing 3 jobs kind of in one. And maybe it's a generational shift as well. Like, I'll never forget, I still, DJ from side to side, I'm still cool, I think. But someone that comes up and says, oh, what's your playlist? It's like, it's not Spotify, this is from in here. So I don't know if there's almost this, I think streaming services have kind of, I don't know, in terms of live music anyway, I don't know in people's approaches to things, but yeah, just some observations of what it was like from a personal perspective. But I have to say, the self-employed support scheme was an utter lifeline for people like me during COVID, and certainly got me through it.
Thank you very much. And in our first committee meeting, we spoke to kind of venues and employers. One of the things they said was they find it difficult to recruit skilled workers. And they think there's a skill shortage in the performing arts and entertainment sector. I guess possibly for Dougal, but is that something you would agree with? And if so, kind of what would you put that down to?
So I think when those producers are talking about, or the theatre kind of associations are talking about the skill shortage, my understanding is that they're mainly talking about technical occupations to do with kind of like lighting, staging, etc., where we don't represent them. They would be probably represented by someone like Beck2, who represent all the kind of technical backstage stuff, whereas we represent people on the stage, performers. So I can't really speak completely to that. You'd be better asking Beck2. But from a performer perspective, the picture is obviously very different, where there's intense competition for roles and lots of budding performers who are willing to put up with the most horrible working conditions in order to try and launch their careers, which is obviously one of the kind of defining issues of our work as their trade union, is to deal with this conflict between their kind of desire to be performers and kind of securing good working conditions for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Cherise.
Just wearing my music industry hat fully on right now is that I'm unsure if there's a skills shortage per se in terms of the technical aspects, in terms of audio engineering, etc. I question access and opportunity, particularly if you're from a diverse background. There are plenty of people, workers looking for opportunities that they just don't seem to have or don't seem to get. Also, I know that there's a concerted effort within the music industry to look at apprenticeships for those technical and production type jobs. I know, or everybody here knows that, that's the mandate of the DCMS at the moment in terms of educating post-16-year-olds to find pathways to industry. And that's something that we do at Black Lives in Music. We create pathways to industry. We have over 100 music industry partners where we kind of bridge that gap. So we'll work with the Royal Opera House or the Royal Albert Hall, and we'll work with different organisations such as Production Futures, so that there's a bridge that we can see people actually get work within the live music industry. So we're one organisation and we do that. I know there are many other organisations that do that as well. So hopefully I'm not saying anything irrelevant, but some of the key words are there in terms of there is movement in the UK music industry to see change and to see access and opportunity, even from the youngest to the smallest of age, even in schools. They're trying to recruit and train and say, look, the music industry, the live music industry is open to all. I watched a video yesterday, it's very real that they're going into schools and pitching this to young children. So hopefully we see those effects, our work, the work of the music industry and the work that they're doing within schools, so we can actually see a booming economy later on in the future.
Yeah, I know the new government is really prioritising creative education in schools from an early age, and yeah, I look forward to seeing their plans and couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you very much. Dougald, if I can just come to you briefly. So when I was working in the same clubs that David was, and also sweeping the floor and doing the hospitality sector, I was also an immersive theatre actor. This question might be a little bit niche, but I want to talk more widely about things that aren't the traditional work within the entertainment industry. So you may start at midday and you'd work till midnight, and you might do 5 or 6 shows in that time, 1-hour shows. And the contract would often say a performance, like a West End performance, would be 7:30 till 9:30. So it felt like the new kind of world of working, the contracts hadn't caught up. What work are you doing to protect these kind of workers in these kind of alternative industries and make sure the contracts and people are properly represented?
You'll probably know more about some of these issues than us, and I think it's a constant challenge for us to keep up with the sorts of work that members are doing. It's easier in the places like the West End, where we have really long-standing relationships with producers, but lots of areas of the industry are much more like the Wild West when it comes to the sorts of pay and conditions that they're putting up with. We are... So drag, for example, is one area that we would put in that kind of box of kind of smaller areas of work that are kind of less well regulated by our collective agreements, where we're making a real concerted effort to make those performers aware that Equity is a union that represents them, that can fight for their rights, that can come along to meetings with producers and so on. Just so that they realise that Equity is a union that's for them, and it's not just for kind of actors on big theatre stages. And so kind of one of the main practical ways that we're kind of supporting members in these sorts of areas of work is like standard contract terms, because you'll probably know a lot of the time these types of work don't involve any kind of written contract whatsoever, or any agreement of terms, or often any discussion of pay before you even get to the venue, or maybe even after the show. So we're encouraging members through kind of template contracts to put things in writing with venues, and to kind of help them to fight for better sort of working conditions, because often members will not have kind of any dressing room facility, particularly as an issue for drag artists. If they're kind of having to turn up in drag, there are obvious safety concerns there, or kind of not having the right privacy in terms of changing rooms. So kind of getting a handle on these issues and how widespread they are, and then bringing them together, because ultimately we're a union of our members. So kind of empowering them to speak to each other about issues that they're all facing, and to take action together through things like a drag network, which we're recently setting up, bringing together drag artists from different parts of the country. But yeah, it's a much more difficult. It's much more difficult, yeah, to organise members in these places, not least because we're not a traditional workplace where kind of everyone's at work at the same time on the same kind of shop floor, if you like. Our members are working often alone in venues late at night, so there's a real challenge of actually reaching members, speaking to them about us, and kind of recruiting them.
Thank you. Steve, I can see you want to come in. Can I just ask you a question in the interest of time so you can feed it in as well,
Sure.
Which is that insecurity and low pay run throughout the hospitality and leisure. What should the Mayor be doing?
Well, I think there should be a charter that is strong in place on that front. I'm just going to quickly revert back, because there are some parallels. The key word was security there. There are plenty of people who are working as security staff, frankly, who do not know what the law is surrounding work, who are frequently sent from one venue to another venue by taskmasters. There's no time element control. There's no health and safety controls in place, and frankly, there is a huge concern from our perspective over how we reach those atomised workers. So I think there's something to be said in relation to that as well, from where we are. In terms of job security, frankly, until some of the laws change around the fact that you've got to have 2 years tenure or there's an equalities issue with an employer, frankly, most people are out of luck. It's a crapshoot whether you get a decent employer or venue to be working for, or somebody who, I call it the apprentice school of management, these individuals who say, I make strong decisions, I do what I like and people follow me, where frankly this isn't the way to manage, this isn't the way to behave. So getting people to sign up to a charter, taking people on that journey and saying this is what's right, and people being able to identify good employers, I think is just as important, not only for the workers but for the individuals who are gaining value as consumers from those venues.
Can I just dig into that briefly, because our primary role here is to hold the Mayor accountable. Is there anything you'd like to see the Mayor doing to drive up those standards?
Well, I think we can all ask for the Mayor to include that in a passport for London, if you like. Ultimately, there's a value for everyone. I spoke earlier in relation towards making sure that not only are we sending the message that London is open to the world, but I think also to the rest of the UK. The other thing I would say is it does not help when mainstream media put out negativity. They don't tell the good stories. And that is a real concern to me. We can highlight on a micro level the good news stories, but unless the positivity is coming out there, that doesn't help us either. And there's been a continual ongoing diatribe that says London is this, London is that. We'll look towards the negativities, the criminality, when there are so many good things about London. And I think the committee helping the Mayor note that we need to get that message out that London is definitely open for business is the value. The Mayor's already doing that, but we need to amplify that more.
Thank you. The Mayor ran on a manifesto pledge of making London a living wage city. We had a part one to this panel where various venues said that paying the living wage is really difficult in the conditions that they're having to face with rising costs, etc. What would be your reflections when people say there's a trade-off between running a successful business, going for economic growth, and making sure that your workers are paid properly? And obviously it's not just about pay, it's about working conditions as well.
I make no apology in expecting people to have a quality of life, and not just a pay increase when a pay increase is needed that just keeps them just above inflation. The whole point is about quality of life and improving people's quality of life, for them to be able to do the things that others do without giving it a thought, will I have to rob Peter to pay Paul? So from my perspective, I would think for most smart people's perspective as well, they would say, I would want my neighbour, my colleague, my friend, my relative to be able to have the best of the best. And that comes down to salary as well.
Yeah, the workers are often described as an alien group as opposed to the fact that everyone is the workers, like someone who's got a job.
Well, certainly, but nonetheless, I don't want businesses to fail. I want them to be successful. I ran a business.
Right.
I'm not coming from left to centre on this, but there's an ethical way to do things and there's a right way to do things. We've heard about entrepreneurial spirit from individuals who literally have to make ends meet to make something work within an area that's not working at the moment, from Charisse. Ultimately, if they're throwing money away and losing that money, I understand there's a problem there. They've got to pay everyone. But the reality is all of us need to make sure that we can protect those who haven't got the voice, who cannot advocate for themselves, to make sure they're being paid correctly. I understand when a business is feeling under the cosh over this, but unfortunately prices have increased and it needs to make sense as well from an employment perspective. If it can't work, I'm afraid it can't work. People need to be paid to do the job. You can't just hope they'll do it for love.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Could I just add? Performing arts workers, actors are told all the time that this is the art. This is all about the art. Well, it may be art, but it's also work, and there are plenty of people who are making a lot of money out of it. And so we will obviously always fight for our members' right to be paid fairly for the work that they do.
I think Cherise put it really well at the beginning too when you said it's a human right. Like it's your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dougal. And you've literally just beautifully segued onto my question as well, which is, so this is about unpaid work, and I think it's well established that unpaid work is a way that people can get a foot into the door, early career starts and things. So what interventions can the Mayor take to improve pay and conditions for career starters? And are there alternatives to this type of working arrangement to help people just starting out in their careers?
You're totally right that unpaid work is obviously a massive issue in performing arts. Just recently we've dealt with a festival in Cambridge where the workers, the actors are told that they're volunteers. It's all done on a volunteering basis. It's a sort of equal artistic endeavour, but that festival is charging X amount for tickets with audiences in the tens of thousands, clearly making money out of this endeavour, and that not being passed on to artists. So we see cases like that all the time. And as I was saying, artists and performers are constantly told that they need to agree to these sorts of conditions in order to build their career and get on. These are obviously long-standing practices and conditions in an incredibly competitive type of work. I think in terms of what the Mayor can do, I think working with employers and venues to make sure that they understand obligations around pay, around minimum wage rights, is something that they can do. Obviously, the Mayor has limited kind of controls when it comes to employment rights directly, but some of that kind of education, working with venues, enforcement, kind of labour market enforcement is obviously a problem in the UK, and well documented that we have totally inadequate number of kind of labour market enforcement officers to cope with the population. I think it's something like 1 in 1,000, one labour market enforcement officer for every 1,000 workers, and that an employer can expect an inspection of their employment practices once every 1,000 some years. So obviously there needs to be much more investment across, not just performing arts, but across the economy, and in kind of enforcing these rights, so that performers and other workers are paid properly.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just on this front, it isn't just unique to the arts. When you have somebody working in a bar or a pub who said, well, we've reached midnight, the venue's closed, that's what you're paid up to, but you've got cleaning up time, washing up time, and all of the other things that go with it, and you're expected to do that for nothing, or you've got to get set up for the next day. They're not being paid for that. And the management expectation, and this frequently happens, well, you're lucky you've got the job, or, if you don't like it, go elsewhere, is consistent. Also, I would like to speak just quickly to the fact that health and safety in venues is a consistent issue, and because of the lack of the enforcement officers that's necessary to actually look at what things look like, quite frequently my belief is there's not only a risk to those who are working within the premises, there's also a risk to the patrons.
Thank you for raising that, Steve. It's very important. Dougal, so we heard from a venue operator in the first part of the investigation in July. We heard that many people working in the theatre sector prefer casual work arrangements as it permits flexibility. How far is this echoed by your members, and are there certain types of casual work arrangements that are more desirable from a worker's point of view than others?
Yeah, our members on average, when we last surveyed them, earn about £15,000 a year from their work in the industry. Obviously, some will be earning much, much more and some less. But obviously what that tells us is that they're earning probably at least the majority of their work, their income from work in other industries, supplementing it. So it is entirely normal for our members to be working in other industries. That could be hospitality work, working in theatre bars, restaurants. It could be teaching, facilitation, role play work. So there are all sorts of kind of casual types of work that our members rely on to supplement their income. And I know that those employers and those theatre producers will tell you that casual forms of work, including 0 hours contracts, are kind of essential for them to do that. Many of our members say that they enjoy the flexibility with those types of work, but our equities view would be that we don't need to rely on 0 hours contracts to provide that sort of flexibility, and in line with every other union in the movement will tell you that 0 hours workers are exploitative and empower bosses at the expense of workers in terms of that flexibility, and that it will often involves one-sided flexibility where the worker can't really get out of it, but the employer can cancel shifts at last notice, and so on. So we absolutely understand that the flexibility is really important for members in their supplementary work, but that doesn't mean that we accept exploitative practices like 0 hours contracts.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you. I'm just going to focus on the union perspective from Equity and GMB. And you've talked a lot about what the Mayor could do. There are initiatives such as the Good Work Standard, on improving paying conditions, and that is a big factor of his work. Do you think that there are more that Mayor could be doing generally? Do you want to start?
I don't think it's the issue of what the Mayor could be doing. It's about those who are adopting the standard or not adopting the standard who should be doing more. Certainly, actually, we need to talk to the organisations who skirt around the periphery. I always talk about companies who like to put taglines on their headed paper on their websites, Black Lives Matter or anything else. Mental health is important. All of these things that they put. But really, are they actually doing the right thing? Talk is really cheap, but actually adopting those principles, following what the Mayor's put forward, and actually doing it is the bigger issue. So my question would be, what are they doing to do the right thing? Why are they not following charters? Why are they not getting on board? And I think that might be the question the Mayor needs to be asking. Why are you not getting on board with doing the right thing by London?
Yeah, I would echo what Steve said around putting the onus on employers to take accountability for the way they treat workers on multiple fronts, not just pay. I mean, and lots of these areas can be much more difficult to kind of make a difference on. But overwork is a massive issue, and kind of lack of adequate rest breaks or legal rest breaks is a big issue for our members working in theatre, where a 6-day week is completely normal in this industry, unlike any other, including 2 matinees a week. And kind of issues around transport home and safety of transport home late at night are really serious issues too. So it's not really just about kind of black letter kind of paying conditions contracts, but about kind of the whole experience. And obviously there's much more outside of things like the Good Work Standard that the Mayor could be doing in terms of transport and safety for performers.
I'll be coming to Charisse at the end, but there hasn't been a lot of discussion about the Night Tsar, whose main responsibility is the nighttime economy. Have either of you had conversations with the Night Tsar, meetings and discussions about these particular issues that you've been raising?
I've been involved with some meetings with Amy Lamé in the past. I would say they're infrequent only by dint of the fact I think she's or the team are looking at a plethora of issues, so they have probably less frequent engagement. I don't expect any different. It's not like my engagement with
So you haven't
TfL.
got a number of meetings that you've...
We have intermittent meetings.
Intermittent.
But
But no number.
I can't give you a precise number.
Yeah.
I would say we have just as many meetings as an example, or engagements where I might see other individuals involved in night industry, or even the likes of Michael Kill or other people like that who have a skin to play in the game, as it were. Ultimately, we'd always encourage as much engagement as possible. Certainly, when it comes to nighttime issues with regard to transport, I'm, really have very frequent meetings with TfL. So I can speak to the fact that we, even with the deputy mayor, I have, diarised meetings that take place. So that's the case. But obviously we'd always welcome every opportunity to engage.
Yeah, and equity.
I'm not aware of any regular meetings.
You're not aware of any.
Equity
So the support that you're getting from the Night Tsar is intermittent, or you're not aware of it. So that's interesting in itself. Would you like to see some more support from the Night Tsar?
Yeah, we welcome support, and I know that.
And more engagement. Yeah.
Well, I think the opportunity to be part of London and help make the difference is always going to be valued when we're able to speak on behalf of and advocate on behalf of our members to make sure that those who have the facility to make change can hear what we've got to say to make that change happen.
So more engagement would be very welcome. That's good to hear. So Charisse, I'd like to end with you. I think the role of the Night Tsar is really important when it comes to particularly for black and brown people that you were talking about earlier, covering from licensing to working conditions to the industry itself. What kind of engagement have you had with the Night Tsar, and what would you like the Night Tsar to be doing more proactively?
We've had quite positive engagement with Night Tsar, to be honest. Consistent overview of REML in regards to the project, the research. In regards to the GLA, we received funding, significant funding to actually conduct this piece of research. I feel they have been a great support, and if I'll be really honest, if that support wasn't there, I think I'd be it would be just another blow. So I guess that's my warning.
So the support, it has been definitely from the mayor, from getting the fact that you're doing this research.
We're actually doing this research, but in front of me, I've got a list of recommendations from our forum, of pre-research forum, and would like to start seeing those, carried out specifically to the GLA. Our job here at Black Lives Music is to hold them to account, and we welcome the dialogue that we currently have, and we want it to continue. So right now it's new. Like I said, it's 1.5 years old. We're in a very good place with them. We want it to continue. So that's my warning, in a sense of.
So do you think that the Night Tsar has a really good understanding of the challenges that you're going through right now and what needs to happen?
Absolutely.
And would have a good understanding of what the recommendations would be from your perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, they've had an ear to hear. And coupled with the work that they do, it's bridged the knowledge gap as well. So we are all on the same page. In regards to our forums, the steering committees, everybody that's a part of REML, there have been no issues in regards to Night Tsar. So we are pleased for the best part for the moment.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Giorgio.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be very brief on this to you, Charisse. I appreciate that you feel well supported by the Mayor and the Night Tsar, but going off the theme of what Assemblyman Bakari and Assemblymember Garrett were talking about in terms of someone actually being at a licensing committee, shouting from the rooftop, allow this venue to go ahead. How many times has the Night Tsar or a member of her team come to a licensing committee or gone to the police and say, can you please reconsider the decision that you've made?
I can't answer that question because I haven't seen it. However, looking back at what I've seen in regards to this issue of licensing, it's definitely been a group effort led by the music industry. So I think with the influence of and the coming together of different organisations, as I mentioned before, Musicians Union, UK Music, and their influence at government level, it's made it a little bit easier. But if you're talking about that individual, I've got 100 stories like that. We've got work to do. We actually have a lot of work to do.
And I appreciate, I don't want to create more work for you, but if you possibly could write back to the committee of instances, I appreciate off the top of your head it may be difficult now, of where Aim LeMay or...
I've got them in front of me.
Yeah, if you could send them. Where they've turned up and said, yeah, please support this application. It'd be good to hear those stories.
Absolutely. I think in this case scenario, we're working so to add a little bit of grace. You know, no grace should be given this situation. We are actually actively working with these individuals on these forums to make change, and this has been the agreed route that we go down. So it is a collaborative work. However, like I said, I have a list of recommendations which I would love to send into you that we would like to see NIGHTSAR and the GLA take on now before we even get to the research. So yeah, I hear you. We want to see action now.
Thank you. And David, you had something to say?
Yeah, just very quickly, just to say that, you know, the NIGHTSAR was heavily supportive, I believe, with the Brixton O2 hearing. I have certainly positive experience from sitting on the LGBT Venues Forum. I know they have certainly raised and championed venues that might have been at threat, like, for example, the RVT. However, it might always be appropriate for the NIGHTSAR to attend what is, like, you know, a local authority hearing or such or whatever. But I think it goes back to a point that you were saying, Steve, about good news stories, you know, and it's very hard to get them out. So, you know, and I feel like the NIGHTSAR is almost under an impossible task, really. And I feel like the kind of there's much more bad news than kind of seems to get through. But I think she's had such an impossible kind of held high task that I think that sometimes the good news doesn't always come through. And I think we need to see a little bit more of that and to hear a bit more of that.
Thank you, David. And also on the good news aspect with the work from that particular office, I think it's really important that we acknowledge, and I don't think there's been very much publicity about this, after the really awful events with the Brixton Academy in December 2022, the London NIGHTSAR convened a national forum for safety with venues, and that, you know, we don't talk about that, and that was, you know, a lot of excellent work has come out of that. So thank you for raising the issues about good news. So we've now come to the end of this part of this investigation. David, hopefully you're not quite as terrified as you were at the beginning. Can I thank our excellent panel, Cherise, Steve, Dugald and David, for the really enlightening answers that you've given. We're going to take a few minutes to swap over and, you know, a bit of a comfort break for the committee as well. But before you go, as now has become a tradition, could we ask you to pose for a photo with us as well, please? And thank you very much.
One more thing before I go, so quickly, our Lambeth invite you all to a walkabout in Lambeth. Now, I know, Chair, we've done one in the daytime, so you are more than welcome to come for an evening in Lambeth with myself and officers. There you go.
Okay, welcome everybody to the second panel of this two-part investigation and the second part of this investigation. Welcome back, where we're discussing London's nighttime economy. I'd like to welcome our second panel of guests. So, Howard Dauber, Deputy Mayor for Business at the GLA, Shona Manson, Assistant Director for Culture, Creative Industries and 24-Hour London at the GLA, and Paul Broadhurst, the 24-Hour London Manager at the GLA. Welcome all. I'm going to start off with a question. So all the questions will be for all of you. And I'm going to start off with the question, but if you could, just at the very beginning, spend just 30 seconds just talking about your role and what it is that you do. So the 24 London team's briefing to the committee stated that the GLA has worked with hundreds of venues to protect them from closure and that dozens of venues opened with the Mayor's support. Can you give some examples of the actions you have taken to achieve these outcomes? Howard, if we could start with you, please.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me to the committee. I've obviously been in post since December last year as Deputy Mayor for Business. In May, after the election, I took on additional responsibility for the growth plan that was in the Mayor's manifesto and for skills. So I've been involved on the sidelines of this, really, supporting Amy in engaging with the business community, and so I've been to some of the events that she's organised, and then working with the team in terms of mainlining the 24-hour economy into the growth plan. So the last couple of months I've been to some specific meetings with, for example, Soho Business Alliance and a couple of other people to talk about the particular issues that face the sector and the things that we might do within the growth plan and within the skills side to support that. So, but I've not personally been involved in any of the specific venue work because that's been the team.
Thank you, Shona.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, Paul and I will double act throughout this, I'm sure, as Paul very much leads the work in our team. But I guess if I start by talking about some of the challenges in our culture and community spaces at risk office, maybe then we can talk a little bit more about some of the strategic work around licensing, for example, and look at it in that way. I mean, you know, you've heard lots about the issues facing businesses and venues today, so I won't go into those in more detail. What we do know is that we have managed to stabilise, even throughout the extreme conditions of COVID, from the losses that we were seeing before that. So, you know, before 2017, London had lost 35% of its grassroots music venues, 62% of its LGBTQ+ venues. The work that we've been doing around data collection has been really key in understanding the patterns and the issues around that. And, you know, our audits have shown, even around pubs where we know there have been extreme pressures, that those numbers in 2023 remained largely unchanged since the data in 2019, with some variations within that. Overall, outside of that, though, of course, we know that in hospitality, so in businesses that actually are sitting slightly outside of our culture and community spaces at risk work, we have seen net losses. So over 1,600 hospitality businesses closed between March 2020 and December 2023. That could mainly be kind of cafes and restaurants. Some pubs, clubs and venues, but we know we have openings as well. So we're doing a range of things there. Our culture and community spaces at risk office is a world first. It's been emulated in other cities, as you've heard. So New York, for example, has picked that up through the work that we do through the World Cities Culture Forum. Throughout the pandemic, we also invested funds, working in partnership with organisations across London to get that to the grassroots venues that needed it most, £2.3 million worth of funds. We've also been working to support venues through great campaigns throughout that period, like Let's Do London, which has really been about bringing visitors back and supporting, you know, a broad range of venues in that way. But we also work with venues very specifically on a one-to-one basis, which I think is what you're interested in hearing a little bit more about. So, for example, with Printworks, which has been a recent very high-profile study example in the press. In 2017, there was a partnership, that's the background to this, between Broadwick Live and British Land that enabled the temporary use of the Printworks building at Canada Water. Obviously, temporary meanwhile use is very prevalent across London, but when venues are so successful, it then becomes an issue when the kind of longer-term development has to begin. This meanwhile use was part of the Canada Water Master Plan, which allowed the venue to operate whilst that development was getting on that important site, delivering 4,000 homes and 20,000 jobs. So it's Southwark Council's support of that enabled Printworks to become a real global status venue and to catalyse the kind of regeneration and placemaking leading up to that master plan. So it was intended from the start to operate on a temporary basis, but given the success, with support from Amy and the team, we then were able to come back together with the venue, with British Land and with Broadwick Live, and to gain agreement to retain the Printworks venue. So that will reopen in 2026 as a permanent venue as part of that master plan. So that's an example of kind of testing that use, finding the success, and then working with the different agendas of parties to embed that permanently.
Thank you very much. Paul.
Thanks. So I can talk in a bit more detail about some of the ways that we've supported venues. I mean, I think, you know, we're talking to venues, and I talk about us as Amy, myself, the team, the Culture at Risk team. So there's, you know, an extended group of people who take responsibility for this. And we're talking to venues day in, day out on a whole range of different levels. We've supported them from day one, and we've done it in a number of different ways. But I guess it comes back primarily to bringing the right people around the table to help solve whatever that particular problem of the day is. And then helping to navigate through that problem-solving process to a resolution, which keeps the venue open, essentially, and helps them operate. And that can be all sorts of different things, whether it's planning issues. We're often talking to venues about planning issues and helping, advising. There's a lot of education goes on, not just of venues, but also of authorities as well, to help them understand the challenges that venues are facing and the particular peculiarities of running an LGBT venue or running a grassroots live music venue or a nightclub, for example. Licensing is a really big one. We're doing a lot of work day in, day out to just help and support where there's challenges around licensing. That approach that you were talking about earlier of early intervention that the councillor from Lambeth was talking about, of trying to not let things escalate and not get to the point of enforcement, but have mediation, essentially without having a program called the mediation program, as they do in New York. We do that through our Culture at Risk work and just through the very nature of our day in, day out work as the 24-hour London team as well. I look at the list of some of the venues that I think you've got in front of you that we've helped, and I can sort of go into detail on each and every one of those as to exactly what it was that we did, you know, and every one of them is different. You know, the Black Cap was a venue that closed down in Camden, iconic LGBT venue, and has been a really long-term process to try and find a way to get that reopened through different sales of that venue to different landlords, working with the community group, working with the council, looking at all the different levers that were available to be able to protect that venue and ensure it can reopen. And we're hopeful, fingers crossed, now that we've had an assurance that all of the different hurdles, of which there have been many, have finally been got over, and that venue should be able to be reopened, hopefully, within the next 6 to 12 months. The 100 Club in Westminster, you know, Amy and I have had many conversations with the landlord of that building. We've been involved in their rent negotiations, supporting the owner of that venue through his rent negotiations. A lot of it is quite emotional support as well, and I talk about the work of the Culture at Risk team. It does take quite an emotional toll, actually, because these are people quite often who are operating with their livelihoods and their homes on the line, who aren't actually taking a salary from their venues quite often, and are doing second jobs to pay for them to be able to run their venue. And they've taken out loans and all sorts of different things. So, you know, there's an awful lot of emotional support goes on, actually, to help people in crisis and venues in crisis have that resilience and that confidence, and that's the word we so often get back from the people that we deal with is that you gave me the capacity to carry on doing this, basically. And it's just knowing that they've got people, and it's not just us, but people around them. The Music Venue Trust, you know, are fantastic at doing this too. We work really closely with those guys. Black Lives in Music, you know, there's all sorts of different people that together we get together and help these venues. Help with policing, we help through the Culture at Risk Office, we help venues by providing webinars, we help them by providing resources through the Women's Night Safety Charter, training, access to toolkits, access to online video guidance that they can watch. We've run dozens and dozens of webinars, particularly during the course of the pandemic. We help them with access to funding, so through the £2.7 million Culture at Risk Emergency Fund. I think you've got some details of that in here. We provided funding to keep them open. That funding was a lifeline until the Arts Council funding came through. So just those little things where we try to be as strategic as we possibly can to enable these venues to have the confidence, to know that they're supported and keep going, basically. Just a couple of recent cases. I mean, it was interesting. I think Dugald wasn't aware of some of the meetings that Amy's had with Equity, actually, but she has had regular meetings with Equity. Just to be clear about that, we've been working with Equity quite closely on a culture at risk case called the Bethnal Green Working Men's Club, which has come up in the news. And again, Equity has been our partner in working to support Warren, who operates that venue, through that really difficult time that he's going through at the minute. And Box Park, you'll have seen in the media recently, another venue that we've been doing a huge amount of work with, you know, diligently, but not in the media, to just try and ensure that they can carry on at their venue there in Shoreditch until such time as their new venues are available, to ensure that business is strong and can carry on.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Giorgio.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the committee's first meeting, we heard from industry experts, and they all unanimously agreed that it is not a true, London is not a true 24-hour economy. Now, the reason why they've said that, and part of the reason, I would suggest, is because, and Shona's already mentioned some of these numbers, we've had 46 London pubs that have gone under in the last 6 months. London has the fastest rate of closures in the whole of the UK for pubs. LGBTQ plus venues have declined by 62%. Average operating costs for businesses have shot up by 30 to 40%. Meanwhile, the Night Tsar has a bigger team than ever. Now, I appreciate everything that's been said. There are a lot of good case studies. There's been a lot of good individual cases worked on. But it seems to me that we could be bolder. Now, Howard, you're a man from private industry, and I know that you're well regarded in Canary Wharf. Are the people that spoke to us in the last meeting wrong, or are we wrong?
I think there's two answers to that question. Clearly, there are issues with the nighttime industries in London. No one's going to pretend that there aren't. If there weren't, then we wouldn't need a Night Tsar and a 24-hour team. So this is something that's been identified. You know, it was identified by the previous mayor. As you'll know, London lost 35% of its grassroots venues under the previous mayor, and he set up a nighttime focus with a task force to look at that. And one of the first decisions of this mayor, Sadiq Khan, was to appoint Amy in to set up the 24-hour unit, and then through that to look at, you know, mainstreaming 24-hour policy through all of our policies, through the London Plan, and then all the work that the unit's done since then. So no one is going to say that there isn't there aren't serious problems and a challenge for nighttime industries. But at the same time, I think, you know, my job is obviously to talk up London. And there's a crucial thing here, which is one of the reasons people move to London, when we're looking at foreign direct investment, people setting up their businesses in some of the growth sectors that we want to support. One of the reasons for moving to London is the cultural offer of the city, and that's everything from, you know, the museums and the parks and the and all of the, you know, the wonderful amenities of the city during the day, through to nightlife. And nightlife is an important component there, and it is something that people talk about, that, you know, London has to be a good place for an evening out if you're going to recruit the sort of international talent that you want. Now, I could give you a long list of all the good things about London that I'm not going to. You know, we are a genuine 24-hour city. A quarter of London workers work overnight, which is millions of people. We have 2 million people out on an average evening up before midnight. Another million out between midnight and 3 a.m. We have got hundreds of venues, 3,500 pubs. We've got more 24-hour licensed premises than any other, 5 times as many as the next city in the UK. And we've got lots of new openings. We mentioned, you mentioned Printworks. We've got Drumsheds that open. It's 15,000 capacity venue. Stormzy's new club in Poland Street. New club in Denmark Street. You know, there's loads of good stuff going on. We should be talking that up at the same time as identifying what the challenges are and making sure that we aren't losing, you know, some of our venues that are at risk. There are lots of reasons. You know, you mentioned higher costs, cost of living. Post-COVID has made it that, you know, people are going out fewer times than they used to. We've obviously had, you know, a significant drop in tourism post-COVID, which is only now just returning. I'm pleased to say we got up to 23 million visitors last year, so we're getting back up to pre-pandemic levels. But, you know, we've taken a big hit really over the last few years since, you know, really since 2008 and the financial crash, followed by Brexit, followed by COVID, followed by cost of living crisis, followed by all these rising costs. And, you know, there are lots of things that go into making it tough for people to run businesses in this sector. And that's why, you know, we need to keep working on it. And why I welcome the committee's focus on it as well. So I would say, of course, London is one of the world's great 24-hour cities. It really is. It's very difficult to point to another city around the world that is more 24 hours than London is. But within that, there are very significant challenges that we need to focus on.
Right, and if I may, just before I get on to my next question, Howard, I appreciate everything that you said, and I'm not disputing a lot of it. But ultimately, there is a problem. And one of the biggest frustrations, I always get this whataboutery, but London is the greatest city in the world. Of course it is. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to be assembly members and we wouldn't live in this city. We love it, you know, but it could always be better. And I think that's the key point that this committee is trying to get across.
Yeah.
Of course, there are fantastic aspects. There are brilliant nighttime venues, but we could be better in supporting them and be bolder in how we tackle those issues. That's the gist of, I think, what we're all getting at. And so I appreciate what you've said, but once again, I continue. No one is disputing we're the greatest city in the world. No question about that from this panel. But things can be better, and we can utilise our resources better rather than pointing to individual cases. We need to, I would suggest, have a bolder strategy. Now, in your growth plan, in the Mayor's growth plan, moving forward, can you promise there will be a bolder offer for the nighttime economy?
There will be a new offer for the nighttime economy. I can guarantee that. In the Mayor's manifesto, he said there'll be 2 new things. There'll be a nighttime task force and a new nighttime fund as well. So we've already identified some things that we will do. Within that, a huge part of what I've been doing in terms of listening and engaging with the sector, including we've talked a lot about pubs and clubs and stuff, but the restaurant sector has had a rough time of it as well. And, you know, yes, they're part of the nighttime economy. They're also a crucial part of the daytime economy too. Crucial for tourism. We've got, you know, we have a very good reputation for the restaurant sector in London. And we've got some venues that are going great guns, but others that are really clinging on by the fingertips. And there's a whole load of reasons for that. You know, we've mentioned rents, we've mentioned business rates, which obviously we benefit from business rates, but they're, you know, it's tough. People coming off the COVID breaks from business rates found that cliff edge very difficult. Cost of staffing's gone up, the cost of supplies have gone up. Power has hit a lot of people really badly because, of course, businesses weren't protected in the way that consumers were from the power costs. So people, you know, I was talking to a guy a couple of months ago who had run a very successful restaurant and got to the point where he looked ahead for the next year and said, you know what, we're not going to make any money. you know, as an owner, I'm actually not going to be able to take any money out of the restaurant. And he could have held on, wait for the maths to change, but he decided to call it quits, which is really sad. And I don't want to see any of those. Some of those things we can influence. Some of those things we can campaign on, particularly with national government, and we will, because, like I said, it's a crucial part of the of the whole infrastructure of London. So the answer to your question is yes. We're already looking at, as per the Mayor's Manifesto, where we can go further in support of the sector.
Okay, thank you. The London Plan introduced a number of policies aimed at protecting London's nightlife, such as the Agent of Change principle and pub protections. What impact have these policies had so far? So I know we've covered some a bit, but yeah, we could just, whatever hasn't been mentioned already, if you could do so briefly, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, I can take that. So, I mean, I think obviously we're incredibly lucky to have the London Plan in London. Other regions around the country don't have a similar power. And it's meant that we've been able to put in place protections for culture, for pubs, for nightlife that are stronger than elsewhere. And we're seeing the benefits of that now. Obviously, a strategic document like that takes a while for the effects to flow through. But actually just having that conversation about the Agent of Change principle, the importance of protecting, this emerged from grassroots live music venues in particular, but it affects a whole range of different places, has meant that developers, councils, decision makers, and venues themselves, the music industry, etc., ourselves, having a totally different conversation about the need to protect those venues now. So just in itself, that's helped to flag issues and rally people around trying to save venues rather than simply bulldozer them and build something on top. We've been involved in many cases now where that Agent of Change principle is being played out through the planning system. So, for example, the George Tavern in Stepney is an amazing sort of listed pub and really incredible small music venue. They've been protected, and that the future of creative activity at that pub, because it's not just about live music. They do filming there. They have writers' workshops, all sorts of. Phoebe Waller-Bridge started out there, you know, all sorts of things. That venue is protected because of the Agent of Change principle existing in the London Plan. Corsica Studios at Elephant and Castle, residential block going up right on the doorstep of it, right at the back, just a few metres away. Lots and lots of in-depth conversations, because this is a test case in many ways, with the developer, with the council, with ourselves, and with the venue sat around the table over weeks and weeks and weeks, ensuring that the right mitigations were put in place to ensure that venue, which is a really loud venue, probably one of the loudest venues in the country, was able to continue its operation, even with residents living at the back. So lots of great stuff going on. Those are just two examples. There are lots of others as well. But it is having some teeth now. We've seen cases elsewhere in the country where there's been real challenges. The Night and Day Cafe in Manchester is one of those examples. There's probably more to do at a national level to strengthen the Agent of Change principle and really protect venues, but I think it's a great start.
Thank you. And I just wanted to add to that, the kind of third leg in the London Plan that's been enormously valuable from a 24-hour London perspective has been the requirement, the expectation for local authorities to produce visions for their area at night. So we're now working with 12 boroughs who are creating nighttime strategies. We've commissioned some really ambitious guidance for them that really sets out the case for boroughs, for local businesses. We've got a masterclass programme running along that. We know Wandsmouth and Camden have already come out with their strategies, and we've got drafts out for consultation in Ealing and Richmond at the moment as well. So those strategies are going to have long-term impacts as well. So that planning guidance is incredibly valuable.
And we've seen a couple of councils actually rejecting the development of empty pubs as well, because they believe they can be brought back into use. The Albion in Hackney, I forget the name of the other one now. But we're actually seeing that it's given those planning committees the confidence to say no to developers of residential, because they know that that is a viable business still, and they're putting the pressure back on reopening rather than developing it.
Thank you. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thanks, Chair. Howard, I think you just said to Assemblymember Giorgio that there's no city that's more 24-hour city than London. I just want to check if that was a rhetorical flourish, or you genuinely believe that.
I I genuinely believe it's not as bad as people have been making out. It's there's the very interesting article actually in on Bloomberg back in April, looking at how there's been a general decline in nightlife across all major cities across the world for all sorts of pretty much similar reasons about people moving into town, gentrification, costs of venues, all the other reasons we know about. And within that, London's proved pretty resilient. Like I said, we've got 5 times as many 24-hour venues as the next city, which is Manchester, where 30 years ago I used to review clubs for the What's On magazine, City Life in Manchester. So I remember what it was like back in the day. And there has been a significant shift in the way people behave as well. But within that, I don't think you can say a city where 1 in 4 jobs happens over the hours of darkness, and we've got 2 million people out on the street, in the hours up to midnight, isn't a proper 24-hour city. Of course we can do more. And we will. But I do think we should be talking up London's 24-hour credentials at the same time as tackling the challenges.
Shona, sorry, and I'll come to you, Paul.
Thank you. I mean, there's been a lot of talk around the data around this, and I think it's really important that we go back to data. So, just to read off a few, real-life facts about this. The number of London business sites in the nighttime industries rose by 11.3%. Growth trends in the number of businesses are similar in London, Greater Manchester, and England as a whole. The number of employee jobs has risen by nearly 9%. The hospitality sector here recovered much faster and stronger from the pandemic than we thought before. There were 24% more jobs by September this year than pre-pandemic. The number of pubs in London stopped declining around 2015. Licensed premises have risen strongly over the last decade. So there is a whole series of facts that underlie this. Both of those worlds can be true. It is absolutely true that underneath that struggle is real, and absolutely true. I couldn't agree more. Being in charge of this policy area, there is always ambition to do more. So I think it's fantastic that we've seen the Nightlife Fund and Task Force commitment come out of the manifesto. I'm sure that will really help us to dig into some of these challenges and look at how some of this success is happening as well and how we can amplify that. We're kicking off a piece of research that hopefully will help to sort of set the context for the task force. I know that this report as well will make a huge contribution to that. So it feels like a really important time, but I think that point that Howard is making, that we have to be very careful about where we lean into rhetoric and how we can make sure we're really underscoring the facts around this as well is really important.
Thank you. I want to look at some practicalities in a second, but Paul, I'll come to you.
Yeah, no, Shona's covered most of my points. LGBT venues is another one. That the decline stopped around 2017, and we've actually seen stability since. We've actually seen potential signs of growth in the number of LGBT venues in London, so just to be really clear about that. Number of grassroots music venues, we were down to around less than 90, I think, a few years back. And now we're showing 132 currently on the grassroots on the cultural infrastructure map. So, that's a really positive story. Number of nightclubs in London currently showing at around 131 on the map. Other music venues, so we have a very tight definition of grassroots music venues, but other music venues, 237 in addition to that 132. So the picture is perhaps slightly different to the one that is sometimes conveyed. And globally, I think as well, you have to say, well, what are other cities doing? This idea of being bolder. What does being bolder look like? And I think, we're part of a big network from New York, Philadelphia, Sydney, Berlin, Paris, Amsterdam, etc., etc. Everybody is grappling with exactly these same issues. Everybody's going through the same challenges, and everybody's coming up with their own solutions. Often they look quite similar, and I think probably the city that is being bold in this respect is Sydney and New South Wales in Australia. Have got some really great ideas. But a lot of those ideas are very similar to the ideas we're doing in London. We've interestingly developed them in parallel and then sort of discovered that we're taking similar approaches, and other cities around the world are looking at those approaches. Likewise, we're looking to New York and Berlin and Amsterdam to see what are they doing differently too. So we're always learning from each other. But I think it would be unfair to say that London is kind of behind the pack in some sense in relation to what is still quite a new and embryonic policy area. This idea of the 24-hour city and really supporting nightlife is really growing at the minute. And it's something that I think, definitely ambition to be bold and really look after.
Can I ask you all a very practical example? So in 2005, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was working in nightclubs back then too. I'd finish at 3 or 4 in the morning. There were diners I could go to that were 24 hours. There were coffee shops. I don't drink alcohol. I've been in a club. The last place I wanted to be was an alcohol-fueled environment. So you'd be able to go to a coffee shop. You'd meet friends who were also nighttime workers, or you'd sit and read a book and have a chill out. In London, when I was working in Soho in a nightclub, I can think of one place I could go that was 24 hours where I would have to have my photo taken to go in there, sign a logbook for security reasons, and it just did not have the vibe of this was somewhere you could stop and spend time and chat to people because it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, I understand lots of people would go, why are you having a burger at 4 o'clock in the morning? But we've just talked about the amount of people who are nighttime workers and live through the night. Why do we have this complete lack of 24-hour diners or coffee shops or just spaces that people can gather that aren't pubs and clubs?
I'm not sure that we do have a complete lack of them. I mean, there are plenty around. And there's, I mean, I think as part of this narrative...
Could you name one?
I mean, Brick Lane Bagel, Balance.
It's not really somewhere Brick Lane Bagel, you can't sit and stop and chat with friends. It's somewhere you go, you get your bagel and you get out.
Not exactly makes them nightclubs either, is it?
Yeah. So I think there are a number of different places around. I think there's a focus particularly on the very centre of London. And I think what's interesting from our research is that we've seen the nighttime hotspots across London are spread across 16 different boroughs. The top 20 sort of nighttime hotspots across London are spread across 16 different boroughs. That's inner and outer. Of course, the West End has huge footfall, absolutely huge footfall. Over the course of an evening, about 140,000 people coming through, which by comparison, I think the centre of Manchester has about 120,000 people over the course of a whole day. So, it's really important. But there's really important scenes and late night scenes, particularly late night scenes happening elsewhere, whether that's Bermondsey or Peckham or Enfield or Tottenham. So it's not just about central London, albeit that central London is very important.
Thank you. Shelley, I'm going to come to you, but I want to give one more example. Last week I went to Theatre Royal Stratford East, went to see a brilliant show. It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock. I was with friends. We thought, let's go for a coffee. Could not find a single place that served coffee. We ended up having to go in Westfield. Still no coffee shop. We actually then had to go to a Prezzo, order some garlic bread so I could have a cup of tea and they could have some coffee. And that was like 11:30 at night in Stratford.
I mean, we've talked a lot about licensing in the earlier forum that you just had, and obviously the Mayor doesn't have direct powers around licensing, but one of the things that we have been doing through the Nighttime Borough Champions Network, through the forum that's supporting the Nighttime Strategy Guidance, and through the Business-Friendly Licensing Fund that we've been investing in is exactly look at what some of the barriers to licensing are. Now, I'm no expert. We could also talk about the relationship between, serving alcohol and food and the barriers that can create. The other thing I was going to reference is, absolutely recognising that the opportunities for nighttime workers to access services as well as healthy food or non-alcoholic food and drink are really challenging. So we're working on a piece of research with UCL at the moment about the conditions for night workers, which I'm sure will again allow us to then start to lead into a number of conversations about late night provision as well.
Because this is an equalities issue too. Like, I choose not to drink alcohol, but there's some people for faith reasons, whatever reasons, they just don't want to go into an alcohol-related space. Are the three of you confident if we had this conversation, say, in 12 months, or to be fair, 18 months' time, will there be more coffee shops 24-hour in London?
I mean, I just have to say again, the Mayor doesn't have powers over licensing, so what we can do is lead and influence. And absolutely, that night workers research in partnership with a leading academic through the networks that we have, we really hope that can make a difference. And of course, the Assembly's support with that would be really fantastic.
Thank you. And my final question, 1 in 5 night workers earn less than the London living wage. What steps are you taking to lower this proportion? I'm looking at all three of you. Howard.
Well, I'll start. Well, obviously, that's something that's very close to our hearts, and you know, obviously with the previous panel as well, and the exploitation of people who are working at night. You know, I remember from my own experience in industry that we had a situation. I better not say which. I better be careful not to say which company was doing it and which business they were working in. But there was a situation where at one of the large institutions at Canary Wharf, the people actually turning up to do the cleaning were not the people who'd been given the cleaning job. The individuals who had a cleaning contract were passing that on to other people and taking 3 or 4 jobs, and then getting people who were in some cases undocumented migrants and other people working at way below national living wage, national minimum wage, because there was nobody there to check. That was about 10 years ago, and that was clamped down on very firmly. But you can see how it's easy that when the normal systems that run institutions and big organisations aren't there because they've gone home, that people can very easily be exploited in that way. You know, so it's a big priority for us. We mentioned the Good Work Standard before, and that's something we're pushing very hard. In this term, there's a review going on alongside what the national government may do in terms of a similar standard, and we're going to look at how we can promote that to nighttime workers and to the businesses that have a high percentage of nighttime workers as well.
Thank you, Shona.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, as part of the Mayor's work on making London a living wage city, we've been involved in 2 specific subgroups, looking both at hospitality and at the creative industries. I know certainly with the creative industries we'd be able to share some information, I don't have it to hand, but about employers who have become accredited in that journey, and certainly, of course, we're targeting large employers where we can. What I'd say about the nighttime industries is there has been progress. So 4 in 5 workers, that's 80% of workers in the nighttime industry, are now receiving at least the London living wage, and the number of workers earning below has fallen, but workers in most of the nighttime industries remain more likely on average to be paid below the London living wage, and actually we know that 40% of those workers are in the nighttime culture and leisure sector. So I think us looking at the Creative Industries Task Force in conjunction with hospitality and the broader nighttime economy is really important. And again, certainly in the work that we're doing in funding, it's something that we would expect of partners and want to be able to influence.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to add anything, Paul.
Yeah, so in terms of night workers, we're doing a number of different things to support, or have done a number of things as well. So there's the research that was mentioned with University College London, which is underway at the minute. TfL have been really helpful in terms of really delving deeper into this issue and are very much supporting that. Because one of the key questions is, well, where do night workers live, where do they work, and how do they get to and from, at what times, what modes of transport, what are the barriers they're facing. So these are all the questions we're trying to dig into with that research, and we'll hopefully be able to come back to you with some findings, hopefully by the end of this year. The second thing is this call for boroughs to have nighttime strategies, and this programme that we've put in place to help boroughs develop their nighttime strategies. They're taking a really big focus on night workers in those strategies. And it's an area that they really want to see change on. So Wandsworth, who have already published their nighttime strategy, Camden, who have published theirs, but also Westminster, Hammersmith, Ealing, Richmond. We've got a whole raft of boroughs now coming through with nighttime strategies in development, are all looking at this question of night workers and how they can support them better. The surveys of night workers that we've done to date come back with what are the barriers. There's questions about safety, feelings of safety on public transport, but also access to healthy food. It does come back as quite a high issue in those survey responses as well. So boroughs are starting to look at a local level at how can they actually start to tackle some of those issues, looking at where those concentrations of night workers are and how they can improve the amenities around those areas. Had a really interesting conversation with the chief executive of the hospital in Whitechapel, and he was fascinated at the idea of what do his night shift workers do when they have their night shift, their lunch break in the middle of the night, essentially, and what is that offer round and about on their way into work at, say, 8 p.m, on their way home from work at, say, 7 or 8 a.m, and at 11 o'clock when they go on their break. And the offer really wasn't good, and it didn't feel safe for them to go out and access that offer either. So they immediately identified in that hospital 2 issues that they wanted to then challenge and tackle with the local area. So lots going on. Nighttime Enterprise Zone had a focus on night workers, and out of that, those boroughs, several of them produced handbooks, night worker handbooks, to help businesses to improve conditions for their night workers. The Good Work standards been mentioned as well. And we've done an awful lot of work to support and champion an organisation called the Liminal Space, who run a project called Night Club, which is absolutely brilliant. If you get the chance to have a look at it, do. They're doing a lot of stuff on social media about it at the minute. They've been training employers and night workers in how to get better sleep and look after their sleep health, because that's a crucial issue with being a night worker. And for example, TfL worked with them, have recently just trained up 800 staff in sleep health with the help of the Liminal Space.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, with one of your previous questions, when we were talking about coffee at 4 in the morning, everyone around the table seemed to be nodding, and I feel terribly left out because I'm usually asleep at 4 in the morning. So, Assemblymember Polanski, we need to have a voyage of discovery. You need to take me to places. Well, that's not what we've heard, actually. So, Shona, I know you've got to rush off, so you might want to do this one very quickly. You've referred to, and Paul, you've referred to the survey that you have been doing on nighttime workers in conjunction with UCL. Could you tell us exactly what the aim of the research was and any other findings that you can share with us, please?
So that research is ongoing at the minute, so that we've recently had surveys out, 3 different, so we've had surveys out for nighttime employers, surveys out for nighttime workers, and we've pulled together a number of roundtables for nighttime workers to do a deep dive into specific issues, which UCL have run. So we don't have findings from that yet. We'll have findings later on this year, and of course we'll share them with you as soon as they're available. The aim of that is to assist with policy making and planning, essentially. So to inform TfL more about where our night worker populations are, how they travel around, and what the barriers they face at the minute. When we ran the Late Night Transport Working Group, it was really clear that we were missing that crucial data. And as a rule, nighttime data is really hard to come by, so that's why we've invested a lot in the High Street Data Service and other types of thing, and other research to actually get round-the-clock data about how the economy is doing, how footfall's doing, where people are, mobility, safety, etc., etc. So that UCL research is filling another crucial gap in our knowledge about what happens and what people do, what Londoners do in the city at night, and in this case, what workers do in the city at night, how they move around, and the challenges they face, and access to food, and all of those things.
Thank you very much. And please, we would very much like to see the results of that survey when it's completed. Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about the Mayor's nighttime enterprise zones and the impact that they've been having. Can you tell us a little bit more about where they've been launched and whether there's going to be any plans to renew and expand the scheme?
Shall I take that briefly, Marina, before I need to leave, if that's okay?
Yes, please do.
That's brilliant. And then I will hand over to Paul, who, as Paul and his team ran the zones. So we had 3 zones, which overall boosted local spend by up to about 70% between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. We had nearly 650 businesses engaged through those. Those zones were, we actually piloted one in Waltham Forest, in fact, before we designed the programme, so 4 in fact. So really they were about working with local areas to look at the effect of extending opening hours, boosting activity on the high street, giving businesses more opportunity to boost income and footfall, giving local people and visitors better access to shops and services, crucially making the high street more welcoming and inclusive, as well for a diverse range of people. There was some really interesting findings around sort of changing perceptions, around how comfortable both businesses and young people felt in their relationships together, and looking at how we can increase the number of night workers that benefit from good work standards, as we've talked about before. So after Waltham Forest, on Walthamstow High Street, we worked with Bromley, Vauxhall and Woolwich. There were thousands of audiences who were generated through the programme as well. But Paul, perhaps as you're closer to those partnerships that we've had and will be ongoing, you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think Shona's outlined the purpose of the zones. The running of them was done by the local authority, often in conjunction with the business improvement district and the local businesses, but also the local community as well. So all of them had inclusion at their heart. And I think it's really interesting that they focused quite a lot on, in Vauxhall, not just the queer community, but more broadly than that, the Somali and the Portuguese communities in that area, and how they can sort of bring those into the nightlife of Vauxhall more. In Bromley, there was a really big focus on families, and also in Woolwich as well. So we saw a number of different events taking place. We saw new forums and partnerships and groups of people coming together that didn't exist before to plan this activity. I think what's been really interesting is they've created brands, Lates brands for each of these areas. So you've got Vauxhall Night, you've got Woolwich Lates and BR1 Lates, which they're really proud of now. They've been very successful. They're going to carry on using those brands to promote ongoing activity, even though our funding has now run out on those projects. And they've seen incredible things like reuse of the library in Bromley. You know, so that library that normally sits closed at night time saw 3,000 people coming through on a night for cocktail making classes, silent discos, became a community hub, and it drew people into the high street. In a bit of the high street that's pedestrianised and quite quiet, the next is all dark at night time, the Debenhams are closed down, etc. You know, it didn't feel vibrant, and by doing this programme, which was really broad. You know, they had a big sports and well-being focus as well, sporting events in the street. They brought loads and loads of people back into the high street, re-engaged people with the high street, families realised there was stuff there for them again. And I think what was very interesting, they all focused on the early evening. So we talk about nighttime enterprise zones. But their ambition, each of these boroughs, was to hold people in the town centre longer into the evening. But what that actually did was then boost footfall and spend later in the evening as well. So we saw that we had this huge boost of people into the high street sort of between 6 and 8 p.m. But then actually as a percentage, the increase in spend and footfall later in the night was higher. It's not because there were more people there, but there were less people leaving, if you like. And that had a real boost for the hospitality and culture businesses in those high streets as well. Woolwich, lots of night market activity that went on in Woolwich, which I think is really interesting. And we're seeing night markets happening all over the capital now, and it's something that in survey responses, people are saying they want to see more of. People are wanting to see now, as part of that nighttime economy offer, shopping and night markets as well as pubs and venues.
I'm afraid I do have to leave. I'm so sorry. Thank you all very much for your time, and I'm very sorry to have to leave early.
Thank you very much, Shona. And the expansion of the scheme, could you go into that, Paul, as well? Where is it going next? What boroughs?
Yeah, very good question. So at the moment, we have got the legacy of the scheme and working on ensuring that it's being embedded in those boroughs and sharing the findings with other boroughs. I think for us, the next stage is getting this nightlife task force up and running, them putting their research together, going out and doing their listening exercise and engaging with Londoners, etc., and then coming back with those recommendations. So I think all of these things are kind of in the mix for the Nightlife Task Force to consider, look at the impact, look at the evidence, and decide, is this something that the Mayor should be prioritising for the future?
On the footfall that you were just mentioning, the High Streets Data Service provides 24-hour information on footfall and spend, and is available to boroughs and businesses and business improvement districts. Have you received any feedback on the usefulness of this, and how has it improved the decision making in regard to the nighttime economy?
It's been really useful. It was the thing that was used to evaluate the impact of the nighttime enterprise zone. So it's, you know, it was the boroughs using it themselves to demonstrate whether those interventions, like the library lates event or the sporting lates events, were having an impact, and they were. So that's great. So they were getting very quick feedback as to whether things were working or not. And over the course of, 6 months or a year of running a program, you can then tailor it according to the data that you're seeing. They've funded a number of kind of exemplar projects across the boroughs as well. So Bromley picked it up and did a really interesting study into the correlation between antisocial behaviour and licensed premises, and actually managed to show that there was no correlation there, that actually licensed premises increased feelings of safety in an area, for example, and didn't show any negative impact on antisocial behaviour. So they were using some of that footfall and data from the High Streets Data Service in that research project that they pulled together. And there's examples of bids. I think Waterloo Bid have used it to predict whether bringing back a particular type of market activity will actually boost spending in their area. And I think it's shown that it has. So that's something that they're looking to do. So it's not just about what's happened in the past, but actually starting to use that data to think what would happen if we did this in the future as well. So I think there's lots of examples. It's been crucial to other boroughs that have been putting nighttime strategies together just to be able to see the pattern of, geographically, where is all this footfall happening? Where are, we know anecdotally, in Camden, we've got Camden Town or King's Cross or whatever, Kentish Town, but actually having the data to show that as well is really, really useful.
I mean, the high street and the nighttime economy does kind of go together. And previously, I asked the former deputy mayor of business to come to Sutton, which had recently got mayoral funding for the Sound Lounge, but that's very popular there, but also government funding for the High Street itself. And I was really pleased that the former deputy mayor did come. And I think there was an invite by the councillors for the Night Tsar to go to Sutton as well, but there was no development there. So just wondering, there's keenness out there. What does the Night Tsar's role have in this particular area?
Sorry, what does the Night Tsar's role have?
In terms of making sure that there is an increase of footfall and also the encouragement of the nighttime enterprise zones.
So Amy has been the person overseeing the whole of this programme, so she's the one that's sort of with us, worked on devising and developing this, implementing it, championing it, and making sure it happens. So, she takes responsibility for all of the work that you're hearing about. On Sutton, we have tried very hard to arrange for a night surgery down in Sutton, and there's been lots of conversations, but for whatever reason, we haven't been able to make that happen, unfortunately. But I know that Sutton are planning to do a nighttime strategy, which is really exciting. So all of these things are coming together, and I think it's just a continuous championing, education process, awareness raising, and keeping this conversation going. And gradually we're seeing, more and more boroughs coming on board and really taking it seriously, which I think is very exciting.
It is a shame that we haven't had a visit, because it was in 2021 that I got elected, and that's when I've been started to ask.
No, I know, we've been trying
so it's been
very hard.
going for a while, this discussion of having that visit. At least the deputy mayor did come. It would be great, Howard, if you could come as well.
Well, actually, I did go to Sutton about a month ago. So I was
an official visit to Sutton.
With the leader.
Good.
I probably should have got them to make sure you were invited. So I'm going to have to come back.
Yeah,
now,
why wasn't I invited?
With you. So no, and just to link at this point. First of all, High Street Data Service, of course, very, very valuable for the nighttime stuff, but hugely valuable for all the daytime stuff as well. High streets are another thing that where I worry. That of our 600 high streets across London, some are doing so fantastically well, going great guns, loads and loads of activity. Others really haven't fully recovered from COVID, and you've seen quite a few shops. We've seen some big brands as well disappearing. Paul Smith just recently. Not Paul Smith. Ted Baker. You've got some high streets that are really suffering. I took the opportunity when I was down in Sutton to see the Cancer Hub, to go down to the high street and see Oru Space, the artist formerly known as British Home Stores, Sutton, where they've got 1,000 people now working in and out of that space, with a bar, a new restaurant about to open on the top floor with amazing views of Sutton. Which actually, it's a much better view than you might imagine. If you walk through the centre of Sutton, you're actually quite high up. It's very impressive, and it's a long-term meanwhile use, working with the council, supported by the Mayor of London, and it's a multi-use space which also goes into the evening. It puts 1,000 people there to feed into the nightlife of the town centre, and provides nighttime venues, as well as co-working space and all the other things they're doing. So, yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on in
It's
Sutton.
brilliant to hear that, and you know, this collaborative way of working is so important. I'm interested to know how you work with the Night Tsar as well, and making sure that, you know, that we have a good story to tell, as you were saying earlier, and where are the lines? So what's, you know, in terms of the deputy mayor's role for the nighttime economy, the Night Tsar, how do you work together, and how do you make sure that we're improving that story that you want to get told?
Well, I work very closely with Amy. I've been so I invite her to things that are relevant that I'm doing. She invites me to relevant things that she's doing. So I've been to the stakeholder meetings, and I've invited her where particularly we've been working with the UK hospitality and with the restaurant sector, and then there's obviously the point of having a Night Tsar is to have a specific focus on nighttime activity, which I think is absolutely right. She works also very closely, obviously, with colleagues on the transport side, so Dan's Deputy Mayor for Transport in terms of nighttime transport, with Justine on the cultural side. So it's a collaborative structure. I would say we overlap more than there's gaps. So you know, for example, I will sometimes take meetings and things. Actually, you know, a lot of this is Amy's stuff, but I'll take all the stuff and then bring it back to Amy, rather than go, oh, nothing to do with me, I'll leave it. You know.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's great that you've got that working relationship. I think the problem is from our perspective is the scrutiny side of it, and we can ask you questions here, but there's a slightly different process for somebody who's employed by as a GLA employee, and how we scrutinise. Is there a way that we are able to get a clear understanding of the performance, and being able to make sure that that good story that you want to get across is coming across in terms of a way for the Night Tsar to be able to say, I am doing the job that I need to do, I am performing well, and I am meeting the targets that I need to meet, that we can then, you know, get across better.
Assembly Member Bakari, I think we did discuss this in the pre-meet. We're looking at a way around, on how to deal with this. So if you could just, you know, do what we've agreed, which is I will discuss with officers the way to proceed with that. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm disappointed that I can't have at least a little bit of a response from this question, because all I'm asking is, how do we make sure that we get a story across that, you know, we can at least relay that the performance is being met?
Well, look, we're very happy to share the positives, and you know, I don't want to go back to the question, but you know, we're not saying everything's great. We're saying there's lots and lots of challenges, but let's also talk up what is out there and what is good. I'm going to come back with a specific potential answer to where are the nighttime coffee bars thing. So watch this space, because it's sorry. Well, no, there is going to be honestly, Oru Space Sutton. The roof bar of Oru Space Sutton is a very good place already, but the new restaurant they're opening will be a top, and it's vegetarian, and it's going to be a top location. But in terms of Amy, obviously not able to be here today, but you know, I think if you invite her to give evidence to future stuff
I'm talking about the role of the Night Tsar. I think that I'm not talking about personalities or people. I'm talking about the role. And the previous meeting, you know, it was considered to be an important role. We needed to have a Night Tsar. It was something that was encouraged, and I'm pleased that we've got one. We've got a Manchester Nighttime Economy advisor who said last year that if nightclubs keep closing at this rate, there won't be any left by 2030. So, you know, there's a problem here, and we need to have nighttime Tsars to do the job that they need to do. So my question is how do we make sure that we're getting that story across that you want, the good story, but also meeting the requirements needed to improve the nighttime economy? And is the nighttime Tsar got enough powers, or has the right, you know, responsibilities, or even the you know, the right areas of work that she can actually achieve those targets?
Well, that's another question, and one of the things that I would say, and I will be careful here, is that there's an ongoing discussion with the new government about what roles and responsibilities in this sector we might want to strengthen, particularly working with the boroughs in London as well. And one of the reasons that the growth plan is being written jointly with London councils and working very closely with boroughs is to make sure that we're all lined up. So that's an ongoing discussion and one we may come back to. I would say the growth plan and the nighttime task force are two things that will be happening this year that will start tackling some of those issues. And in the meantime, we'll continue to keep the committee up to date with the positives.
Well, we could certainly be pushing the government, couldn't we, to improve the situation as well. And I'm sure that you'll be doing that too.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment. Yeah.
Just to note that, of course, the London plan comes round every so often, and that process of development and looking at what's needed in the London plan, we're already starting to think about that. And if there are thoughts about what a future London plan should contain in relation to supporting nightlife, nighttime activity, then now is a fantastic time to bring those forward. And I'm sure the Nightlife Task Force will be looking at that question.
Thank you. Assembly Member Clark, and before you start, Anne, I have been reminded of the times. We've got about 15 minutes to finish, so if everyone could keep their answers quite short as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not normally known to flourish for too long, but just coming to nighttime economy and the night tube. What impact has that had on London's nighttime economy? Or do you think some more of this will come up when you have that data from UCL? Or do you have some current data on the impact it's had on the economy?
There are economic studies about the impact of night tube, which I don't have to my fingertips, but I can send that information across to you. Obviously, I think the key thing is that London has never had so much late night transport as it has now. And that's not to say there aren't challenges still, and there's always more that can be done, right? And this question about transport and safety, is regularly coming up, and we're very alive to that. That conversation, and TfL are as well. But I think when you look at all of the different night tube lines, the night overground line, the fact that we've got over 100, I think it's nearer 130 night and 24-hour bus services across the capital, and then when you compare to other cities, we are leagues ahead, and it's an amazing thing that we've got, and an amazing opportunity to build on that. And of course, it's had a huge impact on those venues, particularly in and around those late night services on a Friday and Saturday night. I guess the question is a little bit about Thursday nights that came up in the previous evidence session, that we're seeing these changes in customer behaviours, and we need to understand that, I think, a little bit more deeply. About whether Thursday is the new Friday or not. I think the jury's still slightly out on that one, but certainly data is showing that in central London, Thursday is a really important night in terms of footfall and spend, but not so much in outer London. It's still very much the Friday and Saturday night. So lots of questions, getting the evidence, getting the data, that UCL research, the High Street Data Service data, bringing that together with TfL and a regular customer surveying of late night transport users, I think will help to answer some of those questions.
I think that's right. And, there's always things that we can look at for improving things further. As we were researching for this committee, I was really pleased to see 30 million people use night buses in London each year. 30 million. Manchester's just had its first night bus last week, and they're very, very proud of that. But we've been there for a long time. And half of those people on the night bus are actually travelling for work, which really surprised me. So it really is, it's not just a good, cheap way to get home after a night out. It's a crucial piece of the city's infrastructure.
Thank you for that. I mean, one of the when we did have a night surgery with Amy and May in Barnet, which was absolutely excellent, by the way. It was really good to talk about night workers who weren't just working in restaurants and bars. It was also people working in Barnet Hospital who were using those night buses, and it is absolutely crucial to think about these things in the context of night workers and economic activity, particularly that doesn't happen necessarily on the high street. It's a shame that we've lost a member of the panel, but I'll come to you, Paul, on this. So about a third of London boroughs have drawn up or have started drawing up a nighttime economy strategy. What are you doing to encourage the other 2/3 to do so?
So we run a regular series of engagement activities. So I think you're aware of the fact that we have this Nighttime Borough Champions Network, which is really important, a nominated councillor in every borough. I think we have coverage of every borough now, who attends those meetings twice a year, chaired by Amy, to share the latest thinking and practice and challenges and problem solving in that forum. So I think that political leadership is really important, and we'll aim to strengthen that. We also have a forum for officers, for business improvement districts, academics, others that are interested in this policy area. So that's our Nighttime Policy Forum, which also meets twice a year. And then there's the programme of support, so night surgeries, masterclasses that we're offering to boroughs, as well as the written guidance that we've provided. So every borough has access to that. Any borough can come on board with that. If a borough is actively developing a nighttime strategy, then they will automatically be part of this nighttime masterclass programme that we've been running, and we'll have a new tranche of that coming up later on this year. I think we're starting that. So there's lots going on. We are constantly talking about it. It's as much a communications challenge as anything else, I think, because we're trying to obviously cut through a lot of other priorities that boroughs have got right now. But I think we're seeing a snowball effect, that it started off with 1 or 2 boroughs. All of a sudden, I think we're actually up to about 14 or 15 now. And so hopefully then we can tip the balance into the majority of boroughs in the not too distant future.
I think I could ask more in here, but I know we're pressed for time. But I think the tough nut to crack is going to be outer London. But I think I'm seeing lots of
But
lots
the
of
data
hope.
is kind of there to show just how important the nighttime activity is in outer London as a percentage of economic activity, more important than central London.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'll back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Garrett.
I'd like to turn to licensing, I think, which is the heart of this. Just by the way, if you're involved in stuff in Sutton, you should speak to their assembly member, because he's a great guy and he's really interested in this stuff. Just by the way, the rooftop bar you mentioned, I think there's some tension in some of the perspectives on this side versus that side. So the rooftop bar you mentioned, I've just checked, it's only open 1 day a week, which is Saturday, and it closes at 9 p.m, which does, it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, but you're not enjoying your late night coffee probably on the rooftop of Oru. I suppose 3, I'm hoping, 2 quick and 1 medium-sized question about licensing, which I think cuts to the heart of this whole thing, because your legitimate response could be, well, look, Sutton's the licensing authority there, it's not us. So firstly, do you or does Amy or does the team make representations to boroughs where you have nighttime licensing applications or planning applications with a licensing element to lobby in favour of the thing being opened or the thing being extended? Say you've got an 11 o'clock licence, there's an application for 2 a.m. Does she make those kind of representations?
Yes. Yeah, I don't have an exact number for you. It's something that we have been doing for many years, dozens, potentially more than that. Obviously, the number of licensing decisions that are being processed across all 33 local authorities in a given year is huge. We can't be across all of them. That wouldn't be, right for the GLA as a strategic authority to be doing that. But in particular cases, I think there is a case where we've set out an agenda, particularly around LGBT venues, grassroots music venues, late night venues, for example. Those are the types of places, particularly important pubs with a heritage and a really important community value to them as well. Okay. Those are the types of cases where Amy and the team have submitted representations. They tend to be written representations into those licensing committees. But Amy has attended licensing hearings. I've attended licensing hearings in particular cases as well.
Okay. Just very conscious of time. I'd be really interested if you've got some stats that you can send us later on.
Yeah,
how many.
We'll do our best.
Yeah, thanks. The second question, which I'm hoping also is quite quick. Obviously, one of the factors in this, particularly in certain boroughs, is you have cumulative. What are they called?
Cumulative impact areas, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously that's a big factor in licensing. So if somebody wants to extend their license, let's say from 11 till 2, then somebody else has to compensate. Is that something where there are representations being made sort of strategically at the borough level to say this is a problem for London's nightlife, these cumulative zones, can you change them or loosen them or enlarge them? I don't mean in physically, I mean like...
So the process for that is when they have a statutory responsibility to review the evidence for a cumulative impact zone. So a cumulative impact zone should be based on evidence, and if it's kept, there has to be the evidence there to keep it. If the evidence isn't there or isn't conclusive, then the cumulative impact zone should be removed. So we've seen examples in Westminster of a number of cumulative impact zones being removed.
I'm just conscious of time. You're telling me what the councils are doing, and I'm asking you about what the Night Tsar is doing. Does Amy lobby boroughs to loosen or de-restrict in some way, or to...
I was going to say, it's one of the things that the nighttime strategies are there for, is to get councils to think about these things in a more joined-up way, because obviously one of the whole issues with licensing is that planning and licensing are separate, done by separate committees at different times, with without necessarily talking to each other in the way that they might do when you're looking at a coherent view of a nighttime centre. So it's one of the things that the strategies are there for.
I mean, one of the specifics I can point...
I'm just very conscious of time because other people want questions. But will I find examples, or could you send us examples of Amy publicly saying, this is not good? I don't know, Westminster as an example. It's a problem for the nighttime economy in London that Westminster has this. It should be loosened. It should be... I can find an example of Sacha Lord saying it in Manchester, for example.
Okay. I mean, Greater Manchester, the Manchester city centre doesn't have any cumulative impact zones, which I think is interesting. But
maybe they have a more active Night Tsar.
Yeah.
Can we? Sorry, can I interrupt?
I think one of the...
Sorry, Paul. Just to save a bit of time, do you think you could send us that information rather than giving examples here? Thank you. Assembly Member Garrett, have you
I've got
finished
one more really short question, which is, actually you sort of touched on it just now about this planning versus licensing business. Obviously, the new government has come in and saying that they want to liberalise planning. What representations are you, the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Amy, making to the new government to say that while you're liberalising planning, you also need to liberalise licensing because of this sort of entangled impact?
We have worked with London councils and we've worked directly with the government both before actually and after the election on some of these issues. I'd better check what we've done publicly because obviously a lot of these things are subject to negotiation. There's a huge packed legislative agenda for the new government, which includes the devolution bill. And within that, we are expecting, again, working, actually, I should have said, with the other mayoral authorities across the country as well, to make sure that that is, that we prioritise things where we might think we can make the biggest difference. And these issues are certainly in there as something that we want to talk to and have been talking to government about. But
just super fast, then, if you could add then to your written response, what you've asked them for and what you think they should be doing. Presumably you know your own mind what you think they should be doing. Don't answer that now.
Insofar as we've got a public statement on that, I will do.
Great, thanks.
Just to add to that on licensing, we've obviously got the business-friendly licensing fund. Amy chairs meetings of the police and local authority licensing leads every month. So we have, through informal processes and convening and influencing powers, brought greater consistency to licensing across London, a more consistent and mediated rather than enforcement-led approach across London. And all of this data that we've been talking about is one of the primary ways that we've been influencing boroughs on licensing by providing them with better data to understand whether there is cumulative impact and whether there's a case for keeping those zones.
Understood. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. We mentioned that the Mayor pledged to introduce a nightlife fund and nightlife task force in his manifesto. I was just wondering what stage of development both of those are at.
Yeah, we're actively developing those at the minute. I can't tell you anything more than that right now, but hopefully we'll have some information for you very soon.
Okay, and you think it will be launched this year?
I very much hope so, yeah.
Brilliant. And how will you ensure that these initiatives serve a diverse group of participants? The nighttime economy, we heard from a diverse group earlier talking about these issues. So, how are you making sure that people like
through the Nighttime Strategies programme, we've seen really great examples from the boroughs of holding citizens' assemblies, for example, around nighttime, and it's proven incredibly valuable. We hear so much narrative around division on nightlife, around residents versus the economy, etc., and around the fact that licensing hearings tend to hear from some people but not everybody, and that positive voice in licensing hearings that Neil was talking about earlier is often quite absent. Actually, the citizens' assemblies that Westminster and Camden ran had so many positive voices about nighttime and so much vision for what people were so proud of what they wanted in their borough and what they loved about their borough and what they wanted to see more of in their borough. It was totally different to the conversation that you would often hear in licensing, actually. So that is one of the primary ways, and obviously through the Nightlife Task Force, I hope that we're going to do something very inclusive and open and embracing of different nightlife scenes and Londoners to get that really inclusive voice so that the task force can make some really good recommendations about diversifying and making London's nightlife even more inclusive.
Thank you. And Howard, just on the growth plan, how are you ensuring small businesses, bids, residents are able to contribute to what you're doing in a nighttime economy perspective?
So we're having specific meetings with all of those groups, with groups from different communities across London, with the FSB, with London Chamber, with bids, with individual groups of small businesses as well, and then small businesses within some of the sectors that we're looking at. So, and then of course we've got an open call for people to via Talk London to put their thoughts in, which I think we've now hit over 800 responses, which is really good. Many of which very well thought out, not just a few lines, but actually really quite well thought out submissions. And we're working through those. But we are, one of the principles of the growth plan is it must be inclusive. There's no point in having growth just for the sake of it. It's about improving the lives, the living standards, the access to opportunity for everyone in London. That's the point of growth, is that it makes everybody's lives better. So reaching out to those groups, both sort of geographically and in different parts of the community, is absolutely vital to what we're doing and a core part of what we're doing.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Chair.
And Assembly Member Giorgio, last question.
Thank you, Chair. Howard, I think you've already answered this, which was essentially the question initially, is what additional powers pertaining to the nighttime economy would you like to see devolved to the Mayor and why? Effectively, it was licensing, which I think was your answer. But given that the Mayor, I don't want to put words in yours or the Mayor's mouth, the government is intending on liberalising planning and licensing laws, one thing we know from industry is big part of the damage that's coming their way is from developers shutting down venues or raising their rents to get them out and to redevelop them as properties, flats, houses, whatever. So therefore, how are you going to deal with that liberalisation and defend the nighttime industry? So that's the question.
There's a lot of what's the word? There's a lot of potential in that question. What I would say, first of all, we haven't necessarily specifically asked for licensing powers to be devolved for the Mayor. Let me be clear about that. The second thing is that there's a lot of work going on with government at the moment in terms of making submissions in terms of the things that they're going to bring forward and when. Because, like I said, with a packed agenda, some of these things may be 1, 2, 3 years away. Some of the things it might be able to do in terms of giving us some flexibility may be done without any legislative change at all. So we're prioritising the things that we think will make the most difference. I think it's probably right if I write back to you about the specifics, because you're right. And as a former property development company employee, it is a real challenge, and one where we've had some real success, like with Printworks, of getting it factored into the final development when you've had a meanwhile use. But it's going to be the big challenge: is how do we incorporate meaningful meanwhile uses and the nighttime economy into property development that hopefully is going to be, stimulating and happening at some speed in London.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful for the committee, and in fact probably encroaches a bit onto the Housing Committee as well, is that when it comes to licensing and planning, you've already stated that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, which has been that way in local government as long as it's existed, and that's understandable. I think what would be helpful from you is when you do have the growth plan, when you do have your representations to government available, stating very clearly, right, how does the Mayor believe he can resolve the conflict between liberalised planning, which I'm sure he would not welcome. The Mayor always wants more power. Any Mayor always wants more power. And how do we resolve that contradiction between the two? it's not an issue unique to him. So this isn't political point scoring. It's just good to know the direction which the administration is going in.
Yeah, as you said, these affect all local authorities, all mayoral authorities up and down the country. So, I'll write to you.
Thank you very much. We've now reached the end of the session and our investigation into the nighttime economy. I'd like to thank all of our guests for attending today's meeting and for your responses to our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the work programme and the meeting dates? The next meeting of this committee is scheduled for 15th October 2024 at 10 a.m. in the chamber at City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.